Chapter 121. Chen Gonggang was a servant brought by Imperial Consort Chen's maiden family. Ever since Imperial Consort Chen entered the palace, he had been promoted from a young eunuch to a Gonggang. He was Imperial Consort Chen's trusted aide. Chen Gonggang was also aware of Jiang Ruan's situation. Although he did not approve of his young Mrs.'s feelings towards Xiao Xiao, Chen Gonggang would not hesitate to help Imperial Consort Chen clear away the obstacles before her eyes. Sui Jiang clenched his fists. His heart was filled with anger. Just now, the matchmaker and the maidservant's shouts had attracted many people to watch the show. Last night, some of the guests in the mansion had made too much noise and were too drunk, so they rested at Lang Zhong's mansion. Just now, they all ran over to see what was going on, but now there was a bunch of people gathered at the door. What a joke! Eunuch Chen hurriedly walked in and was shocked to see the things on the ground. He bent down to pick up Xian Yu's head and put it into the box. He glanced at the palace maid. Leave! His newlywed wife had sex with another man on the first night, but he was still by her side at that time. If word got out, people would think that he, Sui Jiang, had some special fetish. Now, he had lost all of his face. Sui Jiang couldn't figure out why this had happened. The one who had a joyous night with Xian Yu should have been Jiang Ruan. Since Xian Yu was here at this moment, it meant that Jiang Ruan was definitely safe. If news of this were to reach the palace, the imperial consort would definitely blame him for his incompetence. Because of this matter, Jiang Li was unable to raise her head in the capital. Like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bough, she stayed in her room all day, not daring to go out. Even the servants of Lang Zhong's residence would look at her strangely, not to mention Sui Jiang. He would beat and scold her at the slightest provocation, so her days were very difficult. Moreover, Jiang Quan also flew into a rage because of his relationship with Jiang Li. The courtiers looked at him with disdain. The imperial censors submitted a memorial to accuse the Minister of External Affairs of messing up the inner courtyard, and at the same time, they also accused him of not teaching his son well. More and more people gathered outside the bridal chamber of the Lang Zhong's residence to watch the excitement. Two people squeezed out of the crowd. One was dressed as a matchmaker, the other was dressed as a maidservant. They were Jin San and Jin Si. Xian Yu was so scared that he took 2 steps back and accidentally knocked over the screen behind him. As the screen fell back, the person inside fell straight down. Xian Yu cried out in alarm. That person fell to the ground, his entire body covered in blood. It was his personal servant, Xiao Li. What task! For a concubine-born daughter to have such a bright future, she was a model for the entire Great Jin dynasty. They only knew that the guests had enjoyed themselves last night and the host had served them well. There were some secrets that no one knew. The palace maids and eunuchs looked down in confusion. At first glance, they were so shocked that they almost screamed. The thing in the box was none other than the head of Xian Yu, who had been killed a few days ago. The matchmaker glanced at the bed and was stunned. Suddenly, she let out a high-pitched scream, causing the maid beside her to also raise her head to look at the bed. At first glance, she was also stunned. The two of them looked at each other and saw the fear in each other's eyes. Without another word, they screamed and ran out. Jin Si nodded. Not bad. Xian Yu was startled and stopped at the door. The heat he felt just now instantly receded and an ominous premonition surged in his heart. He called out several times, Xiao Li, Xiao Li. Ever since Yi Feng had been transferred to the Yi Bao Pavilion 3 years ago, Xiao Xiao had never used him again. Everyone knew that Yi Feng had committed a grave mistake. He had almost caused the future young madam and the young master to become estranged, like fire and water. The young master had already been very merciful not to kill Yi Feng in a fit of anger. Now that he had used Yi Feng again, it was really strange. Slut! Sui Jiang ruthlessly slapped him across the face. The atmosphere in the Hall of Dreams was very strange today. It was not as gentle as it used to be. There seemed to be a trace of impatience in the air. Even the beautiful and gentle woman on the main seat was now impatiently throwing away the scroll in her hands. Jiang Li was on the verge of collapse. At this moment, she was completely naked. Even her exposed skin was covered in bruises. Those red marks were imprinted on her fair skin, making it even more obvious how crazy the events of last night had been. Jin Er covered his head with his hands and said lazily, Yi Feng has received a good task this time. As the saying goes, when Xiao Xiao smiles, the king of hell takes a detour. The nobles of the great Jin dynasty's capital had been living too comfortably these past few years, and had long since forgotten about this matter. There was no harm in taking this opportunity to let them see clearly, to see whether the legend was true or not. However, at the moment, Zhuo Jiang could not care about Imperial Consort Chen. The current situation made it difficult for him to advance or retreat. If he let Xian Yu go like this, the spittle of the common people in the capital would be enough to drown him tomorrow. The Imperial Censor's report would also make an issue of this matter. But if he did not let Xian Yu go? This matter was originally ordered by Imperial Consort Chen, how could he deal with Xian Yu now? Now, Wu Jiang was incomparably regretful. Why did he promise Imperial Consort Chen to help Xian Yu obtain Jiang Yuan? Even if he had agreed, why did he choose to do it on his wedding day? Although he did not like Jiang Li, she was still the wife of a doctor. If he wanted to maintain his good reputation, he could not divorce his wife at this moment. But in this way, the image of affection that he had deliberately created would be destroyed. There were actually two naked men sleeping on that spacious bed. Xian Yu sang loudly all the way back to the Fu. Last night's torment was too much, so he went back to his room. When he returned to bed, he felt a little thirsty. He casually picked up the tea on the table and drank it clean in one gulp. They were going to silence him. Eunuch Chen bent down and replied respectfully, cover. Jin San fiddled with his hair, Master has called Yi Feng back. Is he going to use him again? Naturally, Jiang Li did not know that in order to ensure that nothing went wrong, Xian Yu had poured a sufficient amount of Spring Breeze Crossing into both cups of wine. Regardless of whether Jiang Yuan had switched the wine cups or not, she would still have fallen into the trap. At this moment, listening to Tian Zhu's words, Jiang Ruan's heart sank. In the capital, who else besides the imperial bodyguards would dare to openly kill a prince of a country? This thunderous method, like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, was in line with Xiao Xiao's character. She originally did not intend to let go of the doctor's family and Xian Yu, but Xiao Xiao had acted first. It had to be said that he had acted very quickly and saved her a lot of trouble. However, would it bring him trouble? The crisp sound of that slap not only woke Jiang Li up, but also made Xian Yu understand. Yesterday, when he had caught Jiang Yuan, it had been Xiao Xiao who had rushed over with his men. At that time, Xiao Xiao had looked very scary, and then he did not know anything. When he woke up, he was already on Zhuo Jiang's bed. Xian Yu was dead, dead in his own Fu. From top to bottom, there was no one left alive, all of them killed with a single slash. Xian Yu's death was the most tragic. His whole body had been chopped into pieces, but his head had disappeared without a trace. If it were not for the clothes and the official seal, no one would have guessed that this was Xian Yu. The other party had acted so cruelly that everyone guessed that Xian Yu's enemies had come to seek revenge. The patrol office had already sent people to investigate the matter, but unfortunately, there had been no progress. Leaving Jiang Yuan alive would be a disaster, but Xiao Xiao was not a kind person. This could be seen from today's matter. They had long known that Xian Yu's death was caused by him, but they did not know that Xiao Xiao had no scruples to this extent. He even dared to openly present Xian Yu's head to Imperial Consort Chen. Was this a warning, or a sign? Jin San glanced at Jin Si, did I shout loudly just now? Jin 1, Jin 2, Jin 3, and Jin 4 sat on a tree not far away and looked at Jiang Ruan. The incident at the Lang Zhongfu made Xiao Xiao vigilant. Just one Tianzhu was not enough. Xiao Xiao had ordered them to protect Jiang Ruan for the next few days. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. This was just the beginning. Once their master was angry, there would be a reign of terror in the capital. The Lang Zhongfu had only lost face, but what would happen next would definitely cause everyone involved to be unable to extricate themselves. Those who needed to die would die. As for that person in the palace, she would not be able to escape. As soon as she entered the room, the tip of her nose was filled with a lewd and ambiguous smell. The servant girl lowered her head and called out, "Yi, Furen." When these matters in the capital reached Jiang Ruan's ears, Jiang Ruan was also somewhat stunned. These past few days, she had been staying at Jining Wangfu. Xiao Xiao sent someone to send a message to the General Fu, saying that Jiang Ruan had been plotted against and was now resting in his Fu. To the outside world, Jiang Ruan had returned to the General Fu to see Zhao Guang and his wife. Jining Wangfu had always kept this matter a secret, so no one had discovered it. The Ce Palace was the most diligent in sending clothes to Mengmeng Palace. Everyone knew that Imperial Consort Chen was deeply favored by the Emperor, so naturally, she would be more attentive. Today was the same. When the palace maid returned to her bedroom, she saw the box and thought that it had been sent over by the servants. "Who are you? Someone come. This prince is an imperial prince, what do you want to do?" Xian Yu panicked. The two of them walked towards him, and after a while, a blood-curdling scream came from the room. Imperial Consort Chen stared at the box in Chen Gongong's hands and suddenly laughed loudly. "He actually wants to oppose me. Defying the laws of the world to oppose me." She gritted her teeth and the crazed look in her eyes gradually receded, returning to her icy beauty. However, upon closer inspection, one could see the burning jealousy in her eyes. She said in a low voice, "All right, since he has done this, don't blame me for being ruthless. I want to see how far he is willing to go for that woman." For example, on the second day, when the sun was high in the sky, the maid and matron of honor from the Lang Fu came to collect the red petals from the night before. The maid called out a few times, but there was no response. She thought that the master of the house was tired and pushed the door open to enter. The palace maids hurriedly pushed the door away. Imperial Consort Chen gasped and looked at Chen Gongong. "Old Chen, it's him, it must be him." There was a rare sense of anxiety in her voice. Jin Si frowned, "Better not, Yi Feng is too stupid." Although Jin San and Jin Si looked exactly the same, their temperaments were very different. Even if they wore the same clothes, it was still easy to distinguish them. Jin San was flirtatious, while Jin Si was heroic. Jin Si and Yi Feng had never been on good terms, so he naturally did not want Yi Feng to work for Xiao Xiao again. Over the years, Xiao Xiao had become more and more calm, and it was rare to see him so murderous. Before Xian Yu died, it could be said that he had experienced the most painful methods in the world. To be able to die at Xiao Xiao's hands, it was really worth it. Jiang Li staggered from the blow and covered her face, not daring to speak. What was going on? How could she sleep with two men? And one of them was her new husband. Yesterday, the Jiang Fu's daughter had married off, and the third miss, who was born of a concubine, had become the wife of the left minister of the court. Xian Yu's scalp went numb and he immediately rushed out the door to escape. Who knew that before he could move, the door would be kicked open from the outside? Two men dressed in black stood at the door, looking at him expressionlessly. Jiang Li shrank back in horror. No matter how stupid she was, she understood at this moment that she had lost her virginity in front of Zhujiang. Now, even if she stood on the title of Lang Zhong's wife, in this lifetime, she could forget about gaining her husband's respect and favor. After waiting for a long time, no one answered her. The matchmaker also felt strange and boldly looked towards the bed. On the spacious bed, the gauze curtains were gently swaying, and music could be heard. Two naked bodies could be seen intertwining. The matchmaker's old face turned red, and she cursed in her heart. Sure enough, a concubine's daughter was unruly. How could there be a new bride who was so restless, like a prostitute? Yesterday at the wedding banquet, she had seen Jiang Ruan drink the drugged wine, and her heart was at ease. However, when the person who had toasted her left, she felt that something was wrong with her body. Her whole body was on fire, and now that she thought about it, it seemed like she had just been drugged. Could it be that the wine had been switched by Jiang Ruan? Xian Yu knew that this was certainly Xiao Xiao's doing, but Xiao Xiao did not take his life. Xian Yu breathed a huge sigh of relief. Although Jiang Ruan was very unwilling to escape from his hands, Xian Yu did not have the guts to oppose Xiao Xiao. The matchmaker smiled and said, "Grand Aunt. Spring breeze crossing was worthy of being the best aphrodisiac." Even after a crazy night, he still felt a little restless. Xian Yu got up, wanting to go out and grab a concubine to relieve his fire. Just as he was about to leave the room, his footsteps suddenly stopped. Since he had returned to the Fu, not a single person had come to welcome him. Manservants, maids, and beautiful concubines, there was not a single person. The entire Fu had sunk into a deathly silence, without the slightest sign of life. Zhuo Jiang gritted his teeth as he watched Xian Yu put on his clothes and swagger away. Xian Yu had never been afraid of the gossip of outsiders, so he was very free and at ease. Zhuo Jiang, who was left behind, had to face all kinds of colors alone. In a fit of anger, he looked at Jiang Li's dazed appearance and could not help but kick her, "Slut." Chen Gonggong's lips moved, but he still did not say anything. Imperial Consort Chen glanced at him and coldly said, "Today, the palace maids present, you know what to do." Perhaps it was because she had finally heard the matchmaker's voice, the person on the bed moaned. With a hand, she lifted the curtain and said in a daze, "Who is it?" On the second day of Zhuo Jiang's marriage, the whole city was filled with lively rumors. One was that Zhuo Langzhong was a good man who valued relationships and did not think that one could not judge a book by its cover. In private, he had some despicable hobbies. He liked to play with his wife with outsiders. In this world, there was nothing wrong with a man having hobbies, but the wife was the legal wife. To play with her like this was very immoral. Rumor had it that Zhuo Langzhong was willing to be cuckolded. He did not divorce his wife, nor did he find trouble with the perverted prince. A man on the bed rubbed his sleepy eyes and woke up. He said unhappily, "What are you making a racket about? This prince will punish you later." It was Xian Yu. The third prince, Xian Yu, bullied men and took women. In the capital, he used his status as a prince to act tyrannically. He had harmed many girls and wives. He had long been a street rat that everyone wanted to beat up. When the commoners heard of Xian Yu's death, they all praised him. They all vented their anger and celebrated. But because of this, Xian Yu had made too many enemies. No one knew who did it. As a result, Zhuo Jiang, who had been slapped in the face by Xian Yu a few days ago, became the biggest suspect. Zhuo Jiang was very helpless. With Xian Yu's death, if Imperial Consort Chen suspected that he was the culprit, it would be a public display of dissatisfaction with her. Imperial Consort Chen was a ruthless person and it was inevitable that she would be unhappy with him. It was precisely because he had become the biggest suspect that his every move was being monitored. Many pairs of eyes were staring at him in the dark. How could he dare to act blindly without thinking? His days were very sullen. Seeing the box, Imperial Consort Chen's expression improved. She ordered a palace maid to bring the box over and gently open it. It was a normal thing to do. However, she only heard her scream, "Ah!" The box in her hand suddenly fell to the ground, making a crisp sound. A round object fell out and rolled on the ground, leaving a trail of red spots on the ground. The Brocade 1 and Brocade 2 had just massacred the third prince's residence yesterday. As assassins, they seemed to have some bloodthirst in their bones. Yesterday, Xian Yu had been personally dealt with by Xiao Xiao. 108 cuts, each cut deep into the bones. It was only after the last cut that Xian Yu finally stopped breathing. The Brocade guards had many methods of torturing people. It was just that the coldness in Xiao Xiao's eyes last night caused these personal bodyguards to be shocked. As for the other person, Jiang Li's entire body started to tremble. Sui Jiang opened his eyes and was stunned. The manservant did not reply. No one in the entire residence answered him. It was as if there was no one in the residence. Xian Yu did not dare to rashly go out. He walked to the window and looked out. He saw a large patch of red spreading out from the window. It was a ghastly sight. "Your ladyship, the clothes that were made yesterday should have arrived." A palace maid brought over a small box. If this was already very shocking, then what happened next would set off a huge wave in the capital. It was all because Xian Yu was dead. He looked at Sui Jiang and Jiang Li with a frown. It seemed that Jiang Li was the one who went crazy last night. Fine, she was still a virgin. Xian Yu stretched. "Miss Jiang, you should now call me Madame Sui. Thank you for your hospitality last night. This prince is very satisfied." Xian Yu still had a frightened and angry expression on his face. His mouth was wide open as if he had suffered a great deal of pain before dying. Everything below the neck had been neatly chopped off. There was blood everywhere, but his face was very clean. It seemed that he had deliberately cleaned it. At this moment, Xian Yu's eyes were wide open as he stared at Imperial Concubine Chen. Imperial Concubine Chen's face paled and she almost fell to the ground. The scream was too ear-piercing and almost attracted the attention of all the servants in the Lang Zhong's residence. The woman on the bed seemed to have woken up a little. She suddenly felt that something was wrong and looked down. Then, she also screamed. However, she had been in the bridal chamber the whole time. It was one thing for Sui Jiang, but why was Xian Yu here? Her scream finally woke up the other two people on the bed, and they slowly woke up. "Your ladyship, please spare me." The palace maid knew that she had made a big mistake and quickly knelt down and kowtowed. The palace maids of the Hall of Dreams all knelt down. Imperial Concubine Chen screamed, Old Chen, Old Chen." Jean Eyre smiled, "Go and give Imperial Concubine Chen a big gift." Chapter 122. Early in the morning, Jinying Wang Fu welcomed a special guest. The guest had an anxious expression and was in a hurry. It was none other than Lu Zhu. Speaking of which, when Jiang Wan had entered the bridal chamber that day, Lu Zhu had gone to get some hangover soup for her, but she had not expected Jiang Wan to disappear. Naturally, she did not know that such a thing had happened. It was not easy to find Tianzhu, but Tianzhu had given her a fright. Tianzhu had been injured and only said that Xiao Xiao had sent people to save Jiang Wan. She had to take care of Tianzhu while anxiously waiting until now. The person who had picked her up had said that Jiang Wan was not injured in the Fu, but Lu Zhu was still very worried. She wished that she had wings on her back so that she could immediately fly back to Jiang Ruan's side. The huge Jinying Wang Fu was even bigger than the Jiang Fu. The maidservant who had led the way left after pointing the way. It was the first time that Lu Zhu had entered such a large Fu, and she unknowingly got lost. With great difficulty, she saw someone in front of her. Without caring about anything else, Lu Zhu hurriedly ran up and greeted, "Gongzi." Jean Eyre was thinking about something when he suddenly saw a young maidservant with an anxious expression running towards him. This maidservant's face was very unfamiliar, but her smile was very sweet. She also looked very obedient and a little familiar. Jean Eyre had thought that she was a new maidservant in the Fu, but calling him Gongzi was a little strange. Lu Zhu saw that this person was staring at her. In all fairness, Jean Eyre was also not bad and could be considered a handsome young man. He just smiled like a ruffian. Lu Zhu frowned and still asked, "Gongzi, do you know where the Jiang Fu's young miss lives?" When Lu Zhu asked this question, Jean Eyre suddenly understood. He had been wondering why this young maidservant looked so familiar. So she was young Madame's maidservant. Thinking that his master had a taciturn temperament, it was better to take a roundabout way to save the country and start with young Madame. He deliberately crossed his arms and looked at Lu Zhu with a mischievous smile. "You mean young Madame? She lives with our young master." Lu Zhu's attention was completely focused on the three words, young Madame, and did not care about Jean Eyre calling Xiao Xiao, master. She widened her eyes and asked, "What young Madame?" Jean Eyre felt that Jiang Yuan was a cunning and ruthless person, but why was it that this little maidservant by her side was not so quick-witted? For a moment, a wicked idea arose in his mind. He laughed and said, "You've already slept together. If she isn't young Madame, then who is she?" "Young Madame was drugged by an aphrodisiac yesterday, and it was our young master who personally cured her." Ouch! Jean Eyre deliberately made his words ambiguous. Just as he was speaking enthusiastically, he was unexpectedly kicked by Dewdrop. Dewdrop had grown up in the marketplace, so she was different from the delicate servant girls in the inner residence. She had used a lot of strength in this kick, and it just so happened to hit Jean Eyre's vital part. Jean Eyre cried out in pain, clutching his crotch as he glared at Dewdrop. Dewdrop glared back and scolded, "Bah! Pervert! What kind of nonsense are you spouting? If you let this lady hear your filthy words again, be careful that the thing in your crotch won't be able to get it up from now on." After she finished roaring at Jean Eyre like a lion, Dewdrop turned around and stormed off angrily. The two of them were left in a daze on the spot. He was wrong. He shouldn't have thought that young Madame's servant girl was easy to bully. How could a servant girl like young Madame be easy to bully? Jean Eyre sucked in a breath of cold air in pain. He was the head of the genie guards, Xiao Xiao's personal secret guard, and he was born with a dignified appearance. Normally, only young ladies would throw themselves at him. He had never expected that today, he would actually fall into the hands of a little servant girl. Stupid girl, Jean Eyre grinded his teeth. If this prince catches you again, this prince will definitely teach you a good lesson. On the tree, Jean San and Jean Yi were eating melon seeds and watching the show. Jean San said, "You're courting death. If you offend young Madame's servant girl, Jean Eyre won't be far from death." The expression on Jean Yi's face, which was exactly the same as Jean Eyre's, did not change. It was as wooden as a rock. Jean San glanced at him in disdain. He thought to himself, they had the same appearance, but how could the temperaments of twins be so different? One of them was expressionless all day long, while the other was as dissolute as a street ruffian. Not to mention Dewdrop's side, the young Madame and young master that Jean Eyre mentioned were not as affectionate as the rumor said. Jiang Yuan drank a mouthful of honeyed lotus leaf water. Genieing Wan Fu seemed to be used to being cold and cheerless, and there were no women coming or going. Housekeeper Lin searched for a long time before he finally found a chef who could make sweet water and made a few snacks. Originally, Jiang Yuan wanted to curry favor with her future young madam, but in fact, she herself was not used to this kind of sweet food. The servants of Genieing Wan Fu were too enthusiastic towards her. Even though she was 1,000 miles away from them in her heart, she could only put on a gentle front. Xiao Xiao sat opposite her. The morning air was fresh, and as the sun shone at an angle, his elegant profile seemed to be plated with a layer of golden light. His black robe was embroidered with a golden qilin, which made him look as cold as jade. Even the way he drank tea revealed an elegant nobility that was engraved into his bones. There were some people who, even if they did nothing, would still attract attention just by sitting there. Jiang Yuan had seen a lot these past few days, but when she saw such a beautiful scene, she could not help but be slightly absent-minded. She lowered her head and drank a mouthful of honeyed water. It was somewhat sweet, and she looked at Xiao Xiao and asked, "Were you the one who announced the trip?" Xiao Xiao nodded. Jiang Yuan asked again, "Did you deliver his severed head to Chen Fei?" Xiao Xiao's eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. "He only has himself to blame." Jiang Yuan rested her chin on the edge of the cup. Xiao Xiao had done this for her sake. She carefully looked at the youth in front of her. Originally, she felt that he had helped her a lot. However, these days, the subtle feeling in her heart was getting stronger and stronger. She was not a fool. In this life, if she did not understand the strange feeling in her heart, then she would have lived in vain. Such a proud son of heaven had helped her again and again. If it had been her in her previous life, she would have fallen into his hands long ago. However, it was a pity that their paths crossed in this life. Jiang Ruan's heart was slightly bitter. She had come bearing hatred, and in this life, her hands were destined to be stained with blood. She did not even dare to get close to the Zhao family, so how could she dare to be tempted? In her previous life, she had died too early and did not know what had happened in the future. However, Xiao Xiao had always been on the emperor's side. When the emperor had died, Xiao Xiao had still been in the southern frontier. If Xiao Xiao had returned, how could Xianli have let him go? In her previous life, she did not know what had happened to him in the end. Thinking of this, Jiang Yuan unconsciously frowned. Seeing her like this, Xiao Xiao thought that she was worried about the matter of Imperial Consort Chen, so he softened his voice and said, "I have already arranged things in the palace, you do not need to worry too much." Jiang Yuan returned to her senses and said in a gentle voice, "Xiao Xiao, you have helped me a lot, but Consort Chen and I are like fire and water. I have my own methods, you do not need to intervene." Xiao Xiao was silent for a moment. "I understand." He knew that Jiang Yuan had many secrets. Even the most outstanding spy of the embroidered uniform guards could not discover these secrets. Although he was puzzled, he did not want to pry. Everyone had their own secrets. Jiang Yuan's secret was that there was always a trace of darkness hidden in her eyes. That trace of darkness was too deep. Although it was well concealed, occasionally, it would unconsciously leak out, causing her entire body to be filled with hostility. Last night, when she was unconscious, she had also called out a name, Xianli. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes, his long eyelashes concealing the emotions in his eyes. What grudge did she have with Xianli? Last night, when Jiang Yuan was unconscious, she had called out this name in a tone of grief and indignation. He had ordered the spies to investigate, but they had not found any grudge between Xianli and Jiang Yuan. After a long silence, Xiao Xiao said, "What do you plan to do?" "Xian Yu is already dead, the Lang Zhongfu and Jiangli will also suffer the consequences of their own evil deeds. Imperial Consort Chen has spent so much effort to put on this show, how can we let it end so hastily?" A trace of darkness flashed in Jiang Yuan's eyes. Xiao Xiao saw it and said, "If there is anything, I will help you." "Many thanks." Jiang Yuan thanked Xiao Xiao, thinking that Xiao Xiao's move was indeed brilliant. Xian Yu's death could be considered to have erased all traces. Jiang Li and the Lang Zhongfu seemed to have saved their lives, but the more this matter developed, the more people would be implicated, and the more the Lang Zhongfu would be in trouble. She would not sympathize with Jiang Li and Zhuo Jiang. These two wanted to harm her, so even death would be considered a light punishment. The only one who had not been punished was Imperial Consort Chen. Since Imperial Consort Chen had the leisure to worry about her matters, how could she let Imperial Consort Chen down? Jiang Yuan sneered in her heart. It seemed that she had not seen holy monk Huiju for a long time, but now it should be the state preceptor. In the general Fu, Zhao Guang paced back and forth in his study. The sword hanging on the wall was taken down one moment, and then rehung the next. Zhao Yuanfeng said coldly, "Father, if you continue to walk like this, I will faint." What do you know? Zhao Guang was just feeling annoyed that he had nowhere to vent his anger. Zhao Yuanfeng had bumped into the tip of the spear, and he immediately flew into a rage. Your nephew has been drugged with an aphrodisiac, and I, your father, still can't take a few steps. Zhao Yuanping could not stand it any longer and said, Father, what are you so anxious about? Hasn't this person been cleaned up by Xiao Wang yet? Ruan Lasse's fingers are not even hurt, and she is obediently staying in your Jinying Wang Fu. Why are you getting angry at third brother? A few days ago, Xiao Xiao had sent someone to deliver a letter to the General Fu, and the person who had delivered the letter had recounted the entire sequence of events. Zhao Guang was so angry that he almost took out his sword and went out to chop down the Lang Zhongfu and that lecherous prince. However, the person had told Zhao Guang not to be impatient, and that everything would be arranged by Xiao Xiao. As a result, the next day, the Lang Zhongfu had a scandal, and the entire household of the third prince had been exterminated. Even if one were to use their toes to think that this was Xiao Xiao's doing, but Zhao Guang was still very unhappy. This is your father's family matter, why should an outsider like him interfere? Besides, Ruan Lass is an unmarried daughter, what is the point of sending her to Jinying Wang Fu? Yuan Jia, go and fetch your nephew back for me. The eldest son of the Zhao family, Zhao Yuan Jia, had been inexplicably singled out by Zhao Guang, and he said helplessly, Father, if we go and fetch Ruan back now, won't we be giving others an opportunity to take advantage of? Since Xiao Wangye has helped Ruan, he will not harm her. These past few days, there had been a few pairs of unfamiliar eyes staring at the General Fu. The retainers had not been able to find them, and they thought that they were definitely spies, most likely targeting Jiang Ruan. Now that the outside world had announced that Jiang Ruan was in the General Fu, if her whereabouts were to be leaked at this time, it would only be detrimental to Jiang Ruan and the entire General Fu. Zhao Guang naturally understood this principle, but knowing was one thing, and feeling dissatisfied was another. Originally, Jiang Ruan was the granddaughter of the Zhao family, but the matter of revenge had been left to Xiao Xiao, an outsider. Moreover, the attitude of the person who had delivered the letter that day made Zhao Guang feel suffocated. It was as if Jinying Wang Fu was Jiang Ruan's home, and the General Fu were the bad guys. Zhao Guang's stubborn temper flared up, and he did not see eye to eye with Xiao Xiao. Although he was grateful that Xiao Xiao had saved Jiang Ruan at a crucial time, he still found it difficult to calm down. He angrily said to Zhao Yuanjia, what do you know? Who knows if that Xiao brat has taken a fancy to that Ruan Lass, or if he has some improper thoughts towards her. Ruan Lass is still young, what if she has been deceived? At that time, Zhao Mei had not been able to discern people's true intentions, and that was why she had wasted her entire life, and even lost a pair of children. This matter would forever be a pain in Zhao Guang's heart. Zhao Yuanping sneered and laughed out loud, Father, Xiao Xiao has developed other thoughts towards that Ruan Lass. Don't say this out loud. Besides, how could Ruan Lass be deceived? As long as she doesn't deceive others, it's fine. Everyone in the Great Jin dynasty knew that Xiao Xiao had a cold and indifferent personality, and that he did not lust after women. Even if Jiang Ruan was an outstanding beauty, in Xiao Xiao's eyes, she was just a passerby. Moreover, Jiang Ruan's temperament was gentle on the surface, but in reality, she was cold and ruthless. Zhao Yuanping followed in the footsteps of the Zhao family, and the way he looked at women was also the same. He felt that women should be like Zhao Mei, warm and pure. Although Jiang Ruan was his niece, men would not like such a temperament. Of course, many years later, it was proven that Zhao Yuanping, the smartest military advisor of the Zhao family, also had times when he made a mistake. However, at present, he still felt that his way of thinking was correct. However, Zhao Guang was an extremely protective person, and once he heard Zhao Yuanping's words, he became angry. He slammed the table heavily, and stiffened his neck, saying, Are you still a member of the Zhao family? What's wrong with Ruan Lass? Ruan Lass is beautiful, and the Shao family's brat has never met someone as good as Yuan Las. Get out of my sight. Zhao Yuanfeng finally lost his patience and stood up, saying, Father, now is not the time to quarrel with eldest brother and second brother. We can talk about Shao Wangye's matter another day. Yuan Las has suffered so much, shouldn't we do something? What can we do? Zhao Guang was angry, everything has been done by the Shao family's brat. Isn't there still imperial consort Chen? Zhao Yuanfeng reminded. Zhao Guang frowned, how can a woman from the harem intervene? Although his anger was difficult to quell, imperial consort Chen was in the harem, and he was an official. He had no chance to do anything, and this matter could not be made public. He could not think of a solution no matter what. Zhao Yuanping snapped his fingers, imperial consort Chen cannot be touched, but isn't Chen Darren still here? He smiled, I see that imperial consort Chen is so unscrupulous because Chen Darren is living too arrogantly. Zhao Guang pondered for a moment, then nodded, that's right, I have long wanted to deal with that ignorant old man. Just in time, I will teach him a lesson this time, or else he will say that the General Fu is easy to bully. The three of you better sit properly, this matter is of great importance. A dignified prince of a country was gone just like that. Even if he was a good-for-nothing prince, he still caused a lot of trouble in the court. The emperor had never liked this son, so he did not show too much grief. Empress Dowager Ida, on the other hand, had a rare look of distress, but it did not seem like she was worried about this matter. Jiang Yuan stayed in Jining Wang Fu for a few days, and after the commotion died down, she did not return to the Fu. Xiao Xiao sent 2 people to send her to the palace. Xiao Xiao's subordinates were not ordinary people, so they were more confident. When she returned to the palace, she still went to pay her respects to Empress Dowager Ida. Jiang Yuan pretended that nothing had happened, but she saw that Empress Dowager Ida was much more haggard. Seeing Jiang Yuan, Empress Dowager Ida seemed to remember something and asked, Ijia heard that something like this happened on your third sister's wedding night. What exactly happened? Jiang Yuan shook her head, if third sister doesn't say, I don't know the specifics. The Empress Dowager shook her head and sighed. She knew that Jiang Yuan's relationship with the Jiang family was not good. When they had been at the Imperial Ancestral Temple, Jiang Quan had not even sent a proper letter to his family. She had also seen Jiang Yuan's attitude towards the Jiang family. She was not warm, so it was natural for her to look on with the cold eyes of a bystander. That's what Jiang, Ijia does not think that he is a good person. He has simply disrupted the moral code. In the future, the common people will follow suit, and the world will be in chaos. Obviously, this matter was very serious in the eyes of Empress Dowager Ida. Although Empress Dowager Ida had not been involved in court affairs for the past few years, she still had the unique insight that she had developed in her early years. Zhuo Jiang had already crossed Empress Dowager Ida's bottom line. Jiang Yuan would not speak of the major matters of the world in front of Empress Dowager Ida. After speaking for a while, Empress Dowager Ida seemed to be tired and went to take a nap. Jiang Yuan followed Yang Gugu outside, and Jiang Yuan asked, Gugu, do you know why Imperial Grandmother is not in a good mood? Empress Dowager Ida seemed to be very depressed, showing a rare look of old age and haggard. Jiang Yuan did not think that Empress Dowager Ida was feeling sorry for Xian Yu's death. In fact, Empress Dowager Ida was a swift and decisive person. In her early years, she had already been very disgusted with Xian Yu. It was her decree that Xian Yu be allowed to leave the palace and open his Fu. Gugu Yang smiled and said, Junju, perhaps the Empress Dowager has been a little tired recently, so she looks a little withered. She will be better in a few days. These words were said perfunctorily, so Jiang Yuan responded with a slight smile, is that so? Then I will have to trouble Gugu Yang to take care of Imperial Grandmother. This maidservant is not worthy of Juanju's words. Gugu Yang had been by Empress Dowager Ida's side for a long time, and she also admired Jiang Yuan very much. At that time, Jiang Yuan had risked her life to save the Empress Dowager, but she had never said anything about it. After getting along with her, she also knew what to ask and what not to ask. The most suitable person to survive in the palace was a smart person like her. Gugu Yang looked at Jiang Yuan with some admiration in her eyes. Jiang Yuan slightly lowered her eyes. Sure enough, Empress Dowager Ida also had some secrets. Now, she was not close enough to share secrets with Empress Dowager Ida. However, in this world, she was not interested in other people's secrets. If Empress Dowager Ida did not say anything, she would not ask. Today, she had come for a more important matter. Gugu Yang, a lot of things have happened in the Fu these days, and I feel very uneasy. I heard that the temple hall in the palace can calm one's mind, so I want to go and listen to the scriptures. Since the state preceptor had entered the palace a few years ago, the emperor had built a temple hall in the palace for convenience. Usually, the womenfolk in the palace who were sincere about Buddhism would often go and listen to the scriptures. The emperor was also happy to see this happen. Gugu Yang also knew about what happened on the day of Jiang Li's wedding, and she sighed in her heart. Hong and Junju was smart and calm, but unfortunately, she was born in the Jiang family. They were sisters from the same Fu, but how could there be such a big difference? As she thought of this, she smiled and said, Junju is talking about the small temple hall. It's at the end of the southern courtyard. This maidservant will bring Junju there. Jiang Yuan smiled, thank you Gugu. Chapter 123. The palace hall was renovated at the end of the southern courtyard. The environment here was quiet and the air was fresh. It was a rare piece of land in the palace. When the late emperor was alive, he had wanted to build a courtyard here, but was afraid that it would ruin the feng shui of the palace. Now that this land was being used again, it was renovated into a temple hall. It could be seen how high the status of the owner of the temple hall was in the palace. Gugu Yang brought Jiang Yuan to the temple hall and said a few words to the young monk in the temple hall before Jiang Yuan went in first. There was a golden Buddha statue in the temple hall. It was the first time since ancient times that a temple hall had been built in the palace. An old monk wearing a red robe meditated quietly, holding a string of relics in his hand. His eyes were closed as he meditated. Green smoke rose in spirals from the temple hall, giving it a somewhat otherworldly appearance. The young monk walked to the old monk and said a few words. The old monk opened his eyes and was slightly stunned when he saw the person in front of him. His benevolent expression carried a trace of panic. After the young monk heard his master say a few words, he walked over to Jiang Yuan and said, Benefactor, Master invites you to the inner room to preach. Jiang Yuan put her palms together and bowed to the young monk. Aunt Yan smiled at her when she saw this. Jiang Yuan followed the young monk into the inner room. There was a small green wooden table in the inner room. On the table was a square bamboo pot and a few books of scriptures. The old monk walked into the inner room and sat down at one side of the wooden table. Jiang Yuan followed and sat down at the table. The sound of monks chanting came from outside. The temple hall had been renovated in an antique style and had a Buddhist charm. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, it has been years since we last met. Congratulations to the great master for fulfilling his wish. Hui Ju's breathing stagnated as he looked up at the person in front of him. The young girl's red clothes fluttered like fire. Compared to 3 years ago, she had an indescribable elegance. However, her eyes were cold and her gentle smile seemed to contain a bit of mockery. He put his palms together and bowed his head humbly, Amitabha. Great Master, are you worshipping Buddha or me? Jiang Yuan took the bamboo pot on the table and shook it gently. The wooden sticks collided in the pot and made a flustered sound. Each stroke was like a heavy knock on Hui Ju's heart. For a long time, the nation master, who had been as emotionless as a holy monk, was once again covered in sweat after 3 years. He looked at Jiang Yuan and said slowly, "Benefactor is the person chosen by Buddha. This old monk will obey Buddha's will." Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, "The great master is indeed an eminent monk." Hui Ju did not speak. 3 years ago, someone had sent him a letter. The person who had delivered the letter had said that it was from Jiang Yuan. The letter had clearly written down in detail all the big and small things that would happen in these 3 years. Hui Ju was a meticulous person. At first he did not believe it, but as the days passed, he was shocked to discover that the things inside were actually happening one by one. Hui Ju believed everything written on the letter. He hid among the people and the reputation of the eminent monk finally reached the palace. He was invited to the palace by the emperor. Relying on that thin piece of paper and Hui Ju's glib tongue, over the course of 3 years, the people of the great Jin dynasty all knew that a holy monk named Hui Ju had appeared. Everything he predicted came true. Step by step, he finally sat in the position of state preceptor. Hui Ju raised his head to look at Jiang Yuan. 3 years ago, Jiang Yuan had told him that she would bestow him with unlimited glory and status, and that she would make him a superior person. Now that he thought about it, it had strangely come true. Jiang Yuan was an existence that he was somewhat afraid of. How could there be someone in this world who could predict? But Jiang Yuan was such a mysterious person. Hui Ju knew that there was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Jiang Yuan would not help him for free, and one day, he would repay her. Now that Jiang Yuan had returned, it was time to ask him for this reward. Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, "Great master, now that you are the nation master, I presume that the young master's condition has also improved." Hui Ju was startled. His son was his lifeline. Now that he and his son were master and disciple, the emperor trusted him so much that it was convenient for him to invite imperial physicians from the palace. There were also many precious medicinal herbs in the palace. Now, his son's condition was gradually improving, and his body was not as weak as before. His hand holding the prayer beads trembled slightly as he asked, "Benefactor, what is it that you ask for?" "Great master, I do not believe in Buddhism, there is no need to talk to me about Buddhist scriptures." Jiang Yuan's voice was very light, but Hui Ju felt that the weight of her words was very heavy. She was pressing him like this because she wanted him to directly express his attitude. Clenching his teeth, Hui Ju said, "This humble one is willing to be of service to Junju." Jiang Yuan's hand loosened, and the lot pot fell on the table. Jiang Yuan reached out and pulled out all the wooden lots in the pot. She carefully picked one and placed it in front of Hui Ju. "What lot is this?" Hui Ju was stunned. He looked at it and said, "The worst lot, Junju is asking for." "This lot is not for me," Jiang Yuan said faintly, "asking for a residence is also a matter of state." Since the residence was a matter of state, naturally, it was the emperor's residence. Wouldn't that be the matter of the imperial harem? Hui Ju raised his head in confusion, only to hear a gentle voice, "This Junju sees black gas lingering in the east of the palace, I'm afraid that something has collided with His Majesty. I would like to trouble Great Master to perform a ritual to find the flood dragon." The flood dragon was not a real dragon, it was only short of leaping into the dragon's gate, which meant usurping power. Hui Ju's eyebrows jumped. Was she trying to slander someone for having the intention to rebel? What did this have to do with the imperial harem? The east of the palace is the Hall of Dreams. Jiang Yuan said, "As for the flood dragon, it is naturally a beautiful flood dragon." When Jiang Yuan's voice fell, Hui Ju was stunned on the spot. The so-called imperial harem interfering in politics was a great taboo. The meaning behind Jiang Yuan's words was to give that person in the imperial harem the reputation of disrupting the imperial court's discipline. That person was even more incredible. Currently, the palace's most favored concubine, Imperial Consort Chen, resided in the Hall of Dreams. Even the Empress had to have some misgivings. Although Hui Ju pretended to be pure and had few desires in the palace, he was not ignorant of current politics. In the end, he still heard some rumors that the emperor did not like the current crown prince and intended to appoint a new crown prince. Consort Chen's 8th prince, Xian Li, and Consort De's 5th prince, Xian Hua, were the most popular. Now, 8th Prince Xian Li's chances of winning seemed to be higher. If he offended Imperial Consort Chen, wouldn't it be possible to offend the future crown prince's birth mother? This would inevitably bring him a lot of trouble. Great Master Huiju frowned tightly and did not speak. In recent years, Great Master, have you been unable to do as you wish? Jiang Yuan said indifferently, you have seen too much of heaven's secrets and have no way of knowing what will happen in the future. If you are forced, Great Master can step aside and hand over your position to other talented juniors. Under the heavens, Buddha has millions of disciples. Great Master may not be the only one who can listen to Buddha's decree. Jiang Yuan looked at him calmly, it's just a pity that little master. After leaving the palace, I don't know if he will still be as healthy. Jiang Yuan's words poked at Huiju's heart. Indeed, for the past 3 years, the emperor had trusted him greatly and would try to ask for his opinion on many things. On the letter that Jiang Yuan had given him, she had written down the consequences and the best solution, as if she had personally experienced it. The matter was handled very thoughtfully and appropriately, and the emperor was even more satisfied with him. His position as the state preceptor had been very stable. However, 3 years had passed, and the important matter on the letter had only been written up to now. After that, there was nothing else. Huiju himself was nothing more than a swindler. How would he know what it meant to pry into the heaven's eye? During this period of time, when the emperor came to ask him again, he could not say anything. It was just that Huiju had been in Jianghu for many years and his skill in deception was outstanding. In addition, what he had said in the past 3 years was true, and he had used excuses to deceive the emperor. However, in the long run, it would inevitably arouse suspicion. Even if it did not arouse suspicion, he would no longer be of use, and the emperor would not value him as much as before. If he left the palace and his youngest son cut off the precious medicinal herbs in the palace, he did not know what the situation would be like in the future. Moreover, as the state preceptor, he had more or less offended some people in the palace. Unknowingly, he had become an eyesore to some people. Now, the emperor's trust was his life-saving talisman. Once he lost the emperor's trust, something unexpected might happen. The threats in Jiang Yuan's words were all directed at Huiju's weak spot. At the beginning, Jiang Yuan was able to promote him to the position of state preceptor. Naturally, she could also let others sit in this position. With her means and prophecy, this was a very simple matter. Huiju slowly lowered his head and said with difficulty, I beg Junju, to be magnanimous. I know what Great Master is worried about. Jiang Yuan suddenly leaned close to him and said in a very low voice, the position of the world will definitely not belong to His 8th Highness. Huiju abruptly raised his head and stared at Jiang Yuan. He stood rooted to the ground in disbelief. He asked, is it also a prophecy? Yes. Jiang Yuan said indifferently. In fact, in her previous life, it was indeed Xian Li who seized the entire Great Jin dynasty. But in another life, she would never let this happen. Didn't Imperial Consort Chen want to maintain a harmless posture in the palace? She had shown to the emperor that she had no interest in the fight for the throne, but now, she was not afraid of tearing off this beauty's skin in advance. What would happen when the mother and son, who were used to putting on an act, were used to bringing disaster to the country? No matter how much the emperor doted on a woman, he would never waver his own kingdom for her. Otherwise, in her previous life, the emperor would not have begun to suspect Xian Li and allowed him to act in advance. When Great Master Huiju looked at Jiang Yuan again, his eyes were no longer wandering. He seemed to have made an important decision and asked softly, what does Junju want to do? Great Master's methods are brilliant. Naturally, you will act according to Buddha's will. In 3 days, there will be a religious ceremony in the Imperial Observatory. At that time, Buddha will issue a decree. In this palace, there is a beautiful Jiao, and great master, you must ensure that there is only one true dragon in this world. Her voice was low and contained a strange bewitchment. Hui Ju's body trembled and he respectfully replied, yes. After leaving the small Buddhist hall, Jiang Wan planned to return to the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful, but she did not expect to meet an uninvited guest on the way. This person was dressed in a green robe and had a jade belt. When he saw her from afar, he stopped in his tracks and walked towards her in large strides. Tian Zhu vigilantly stood in front of Jiang Wan, but that person knew the rules. He stopped a few steps away from Jiang Wan and did not come forward. Jiang Wan looked at him with a smile and said, Grand Tutor Lu. Lu Min stared at Jiang Wan. He did not know what he wanted to do. After seeing Jiang Wan a few days ago, he had not been able to speak properly because of Xiao Xiao. Afterwards, he kept thinking about this matter. The person who he thought was his bosom friend turned out to be a woman. He stared at the painting hanging in his study for several days. There were many things he wanted to ask her. Just now, when he saw Jiang Wan, he unconsciously walked over. He did not know what he wanted to do and could not say a word. Lu Zhu blinked. This Grand Tutor Lu was really a scholar. He had the silliness of a scholar. Lu Min paused before saying, Junju. As if he felt that this sentence was too simple, he thought of something and asked, are you all right? Jiang Li's matter had now become a joke in the entire Great Jin dynasty. Even if it was Jiang Li's doing, it would more or less affect the Jiang sisters. Although Lu Min knew that the relationship in the Jiang Fu was complicated, he did not think too much about it. He was only worried about whether Jiang Ruan's reputation would be affected because of this. Moreover, she was a daughter of the Jiang family. More or less, she would lose face. Jiang Wan returned the greeting, many thanks for Grand Tutor's concern. I have been very comfortable. Lu Min stared blankly and carefully looked at Jiang Wan. He saw that she was indeed beautiful. Her eyes and brows were gentle and smiling. She was still as radiant as before and did not look the slightest bit haggard. His heart was somewhat complicated. How could such a thing happen? She was still as comfortable as before. Seeing that she was all right, he was relieved. Lu Min did not know why he had such a strange thought. He only felt that because of this woman's letter, he had regarded Jiang Wan as a close friend in his heart. Friends should support each other. It was normal for him to be so concerned. However, he still had one more thing to ask. After hesitating for a moment, he opened his mouth. Junju and Xiao Wangye, what is their relationship? Tian Zhu frowned slightly and thought that this Grand Tutor was so annoying. Later, she must tell her master. Jiang Wan smiled, Grand Tutor Lu is being too nosy. You. Lu Min's face turned red. Jiang Ruan's blunt words made him, who had always been proud and arrogant, somewhat vexed. For a moment, he was at a loss for words. Seeing Jiang Ruan's smiling face, he could not say anything to criticize her. He could only fling his sleeves and angrily say, he is not a good person. This time, even Lu Zhu frowned. Xiao Xiao was the perfect son-in-law in her heart. What nonsense was this person talking about? Jiang Wan knew what Lu Min meant. As long as they were officials in the same court, no matter which faction they belonged to, Xiao Xiao had never participated. No matter which faction it was, they all firmly believed that Xiao Xiao was a rebel and traitor. When the old Jining Wang rebelled, it was the emperor's vast and mighty grace that allowed Xiao Xiao, a remnant of a rebel, to live to this day. Who knew that his power would become so great that he would not even put the emperor in his eyes? Even in the capital, he could be extremely arrogant. Lu Min was an upright official and his thinking was also very old-fashioned. Naturally, he believed that Xiao Xiao was undoubtedly a rebel and a traitor. She knew that he did not have any other meaning, but these words were indeed unpleasant to hear. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, but her voice had already become slightly cold. So what? Anger appeared on Lu Min's fair face. He will implicate you. In Lu Min's eyes, although Jiang Yuan was mysterious, she was a transparent person. At that time, when they had exchanged letters, it could be seen that Jiang Yuan was different from those short-sighted people. How could such a pure and upright person get mixed up with a rebel and a traitor? What does it have to do with you? After saying this, Jiang Yuan's smile also disappeared. She looked at Lu Min indifferently. Although she did not say anything, for no reason, one could feel her anger. Lu Min was sluggish. So what, and what does it have to do with you? These two words, straightforwardly expressed Jiang Yuan's attitude. She was actually determined to stand on Xiao Xiao's side. Lu Min suddenly felt a burst of irritation in his heart, and his gaze towards Jiang Yuan was filled with disappointment. Jiang Yuan looked at him and said, "Grand Tutor is in charge of the Crown Prince's homework. When did you start to manage other trivial matters? This Junju has her own way of handling matters, so there is no need for Grand Tutor to worry. If Grand Tutor has the heart, you can go and manage other matters. There are so many dirty matters in the palace, and Grand Tutor cannot tolerate sand in his eyes. You will have to work hard." The faintly discernible sarcasm in her words finally made Lu Min unable to stay any longer. He felt that his good intentions had been wasted, and he did not have time to figure out where the disappointment and irritation in his heart came from. He only said one sentence, "Obstinate." Then he flicked his sleeves and left. Jiang Yuan quietly stood in the same place, watching Lu Min's receding figure. Lu Zhu looked at Jiang Yuan with some unease and said, "Miss, treating Grand Tutor Lu like this, isn't it not too good?" Lu Zhu knew that Jiang Yuan had helped Lu Min win first place. Although she did not know how Jiang Yuan had done it, the few personal maids understood in their hearts that Jiang Yuan had done so in order to raise Lu Min to a high position, so that he could be of assistance in the future. However, after hearing Jiang Yuan's words just now, they did not know what this proud and arrogant Grand Tutor would think. If their relationship continued to be deadlocked, would he lose this assistance and instead become a big obstacle? There's no harm. Grand Tutor Lu is a good person, Jiang Yuan said indifferently. Good people were always easily soft-hearted. If something really happened, considering their friendship back then, Lu Min would not just stand by and watch. It was just that, she lowered her eyes. What had happened just now? She wasn't supposed to care about these pointless arguments. However, when it came to Xiao Xiao, she could not help but become angry. She frowned slightly, feeling somewhat uneasy in her heart. Recently, this person had appeared more and more on a daily basis, as if his shadow could be seen everywhere. Such a domineering way of squeezing into the heavy darkness of life seemed to bring a trace of false sunlight to purgatory, causing people to have wild and fanciful thoughts that they should not have. Her great enmity had not been avenged, and one more worry was one more weakness. Moreover, at present, she really did not have the mood to think about other things. Xiao Xiao was not a person of the pond. Currently, his brilliance was restrained within, but one day, once he had the opportunity, he would definitely soar to the sky and make the world lose its color. With her rotten heart, how could she dare to have such thoughts? The few of them did not notice that behind a vermilion pillar not far away, there was a silhouette dressed in luxurious clothing standing in the distance. Just now, Xianli had heard the entire conversation between the few people, but now, a trace of interest surfaced in his eyes. Xiao Xiao, Lu Min, this Hong and Junju was more complicated than he had imagined. Not to mention her relationship with Xiao Xiao, he had previously felt that there was something wrong with these two people, but what was the matter with Lu Min? Could it be that the proud and aloof upstart of the court also had some involvement with this Hong and Junju? Xianli smiled slightly. Things had become interesting. Jiang Yuan was his prey, how could he allow her to be hunted by others? However, the time had not yet come, so he could first investigate the details. As for the means, a trace of coldness flashed across Xian Li's eyes. Today was different from the past, he had thousands of ways to make Jiang Wan his. Chapter 124. However, Madame Dong loved her daughter dearly. She ordered a maid to bring a porcelain cup and said, "Her." Master Lin nodded, "Yes, Xiang is a lucky girl." Madame Dong looked at her coldly, "Since you do not want to be sold, then tell me everything you know. Who is the person is talking about? What method did he use to confuse her?" Dong regained her senses and saw Madame Dong. She hurriedly smiled, "Mother." Jean Eyre looked like a deflated balloon at the expected answer. He glanced at Xiao Xiao disinterestedly and retreated with Jean E. After Jean 1 and Jean 2 left, Jean San came in again. After reporting the matter that Xiao Xiao had given him, he saw that Xiao Xiao was focused on official business. The corners of his lips curled into an interested smile as he deliberately said, "This subordinate has encountered India today. Princess has not been very peaceful in the palace these few days." Among her close friends, the situation was completely different from Dong Yinger's. Recently, Grand Preceptor Lin's residence was brimming with joy. Grand Tutor Lin treated Lin Zixiang too well these few days, which made Lin Zixiang feel strange. Her father had always been inflexible. Although he loved her, he was strict and never spoiled her. These few days, he frequently bought clothes and jewelry for her and did not mind being thrifty. "I don't want it." It was better to sell her as cheaply as possible. Even if she was sold to the lowest brothel and had to receive customers all day, wouldn't that be a fate worse than death? The maid trembled in fear, "Madam, please forgive me this once. I will not dare to do it again." Madame Dong glared at her. When she met Dong her stubborn gaze, she finally gave up and said, "You child. Who is that person? Why are you so obsessed with him? Why would he get involved with a girl who is engaged for no reason? If he is a good person, he would not do such a rude thing. You want me to punish you?" Madame Dong was usually gentle and amiable. However, this matter concerned Dong She immediately became angry, "I will find someone to sell you. The cheapest the better. What do you think? Grand Tutor Lu is looking for her again." Jean San was trying to stifle his laughter, but he maintained a serious expression on his face. Thinking about these matters, Madame Dong couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. Looking at the small porcelain cup, she remembered that Dong Yinger had eaten very little these past few days. She said, "Take it to Yinger's room. I'll go see her." In the study, old Master Lin was talking to Madame Lin. Lin Furen rebuked her, "It's all your fault. You've been too obvious these past few days. Xiang even asked me what happened today. You'd better restrain yourself a bit, don't forget your form and let the child see something." Xiao Xiao didn't even raise his head. "What is it?" Xiao Xiao put down the scroll in his hand. His elegant face seemed to be plated with a layer of ice as he said indifferently, "He's a busybody." Xiao Xiao stood rooted to the ground. What he and Jiang Wan had done, Lu Min could also do it. Now that Lin Zixiang didn't have to marry into the third Princess Fu and the rest of her life wouldn't have to be buried in the fire pit, old Master Lin felt a lingering fear every time he thought about this matter. In addition, he felt that as a father, he couldn't help his daughter's marriage. He felt ashamed and regretful. These past few days, he had tried his best to compensate Lin Zixiang. However, he didn't expect that his actions would fall into Lin Zixiang's eyes. The maidservant handed the small porcelain cup to Madame Dong, who was sitting in the courtyard, lost in thought. "Tai Tai, there's some fresh golden bird's nest in the small kitchen. Have a taste." Suddenly, the image of a certain someone who had been poisoned by the spring breeze crossing on that day appeared in his mind. She had aggressively pulled him towards her, the soft and fragrant touch on his lips. In that instant, his heart had been moved, and the fragrance of summer had filled his body. She had fiercely burrowed into his embrace while tugging at his belt, rubbing herself against his body. He was at a loss and helpless. Originally, they had planned to arrange the marriage at the end of the year. However, for some reason, a few days ago, Dong Ying'er suddenly said that she didn't want to marry into the Chang family. At first, everyone thought that Dong Ying'er was at a sensible age and was bashful. She was just speaking willfully, so they didn't take her words to heart. However, they didn't know that Dong Ying'er had taken advantage of Chang An's visit to tell him that she already had a sweetheart and asked the Chang family to cancel the marriage. The capital governor, Dong official, appeared to be tactful on the outside, but he was an old-fashioned person in his bones. Fortunately, Madame Dong had a gentle temperament. Normally, there was nothing to worry about in the residence. However, these past few days, she had been a bit strange. He's a great hero. Hearing Madame Dong say this about her sweetheart, Dong Ying'er hurriedly refuted, he's the youngest hero of the great Jin dynasty. He's not a bad person. Mother, don't be prejudiced against him. Every time he saw Lin Zixiang's unguarded little face, Master Lin felt as if a knife was twisting in his heart. However, he couldn't think of a way to avoid it. Those days, he was really depressed. Lin Zixiang was also a quick-witted person. When she sensed that he was depressed, she often asked him what was wrong. The maidservant, who had been caught in Madame Dong's hands, didn't dare to hide anything. She told the whole story in full detail. When Madame Dong heard this, her whole body trembled with anger. How could I have given birth to such a daughter? Stupid. Stupid. This kind of action was almost like a slap to the face of the Chang family without hesitation. In a rage, Madame Chang annulled the marriage contract and cancelled the marriage invitation. She also told Madame Dong that the Chang and Dong families would be strangers in the future. Dong Ying'er turned her head away. Her tone was unprecedentedly firm, I won't apologize. Mother, I didn't do anything wrong. Do you want me to marry someone I don't love? Then what's the point of living the rest of my life? Chang'an is a good person. I already have a sweetheart. How can I let him down? Madame Dong was both distressed and angry. After all, which girl didn't yearn for love? Dong Ying'er was at the age where it was easy to be tempted. If it was someone else, it wouldn't matter. However, she was already engaged. Moreover, this appearance was really too crazy. Madame Dong looked at her. Her eyes reddened and tears were about to fall. In just a few days, Dong Ying'er had already lost a lot of weight. She no longer looked as delicate and charming as she usually did. She looked very haggard. The general's residents also thought the same way as Master. Jin Yi's expression did not change. He said calmly, this subordinate did it before them. Jin San silently looked away. He already knew that his master was born beautiful. Now that she had been nourished by young madam, she looked even more like a painting. She was simply a peerless beauty. As Jin San spoke, he observed Xiao Xiao's expression. Indeed, after listening to Jin San's words, Xiao Xiao's expression softened and was no longer as cold as before. As a considerate subordinate, he naturally had to understand his master's thoughts. Jin San continued, it can be seen that Princess still regards Master with great importance in her heart. Her relationship with Master is not something that just anyone can sow discord. Dong Ying'er's personal maid stood up to send them off. When she sent them to the entrance of the courtyard, Madame Dong did not see Dong Ying'er. She looked at the personal maid and said sternly, you are Ying'er's personal maid. You must know where she goes. Now that something has happened to Ying'er, you cannot absolve yourself from the blame. In the capital governor's residence, the usual harmonious and happy atmosphere was a little heavy. The maids were very careful in their actions as if they were extremely afraid of touching some bad luck. With just one look, one could see that there was something different about them. The date was getting closer and closer. Just when Master Lin was about to be forced to a dead end, he did not expect such a thing to happen on Jiang Li's wedding. On the second day, Xian Yu's head was separated from his body. It was a miracle. If he knew who the person who killed Xian Yu was, Master Lin would probably personally pay a visit to thank him. It's done. Speaking of this matter, Jean Eyre beamed with joy. It's enough to give that old fox a hard time. She silently said in her heart, I'm sorry, Lord Grand Tutor. Although you have a good reputation in court, young mistress belongs to master. Our master is a blank sheet of paper when it comes to love affairs. If you don't stimulate him a little, I'm afraid he won't be able to understand it for the rest of his life. Seeing that he had achieved his goal, Jean San said in a low voice, Master, this subordinate will leave first. This subordinate has one last thing to say. If Grand Tutor Lu and Princess's relationship can improve, then whatever Master and Princess can do, Grand Tutor Lu will also be able to do for Princess. After saying this, he did not wait for Xiao Xiao's reaction and slipped out. Dong Ying'er turned her head away and bit her lower lip, not saying a word. Seeing her like this, Madame Dong immediately felt a sense of helplessness in her heart. She slammed the porcelain cup in her hand on the table and said in a somewhat stiff tone, Since that's the case, you already have an idea in your heart. You won't listen to my words. That's all. After saying this, she stood up. The servant girl hurriedly complied. When she arrived at Dong Ying'er's room, she happened to see Dong Ying'er sitting in front of the study table, lost in thought as she stared at the rice paper on the table. She did not even notice that Madame Dong had entered. Madame Dong walked over to take a look and saw that there were 2 lines of poetry written on the rice paper, exquisite sieve with red beans, deep in one's bones lovesickness. When official Dong found out about this, he was furious. Madame Dong felt sorry for her daughter and apologized on her behalf. She only said that the child was not sensible and spoke carelessly. She then brought Dong Ying'er out to apologize to the Chang family. Who knew that Dong Ying'er would say in front of the Chang family that she already had a sweetheart? She was so resolute that there was no room for negotiation. The marriage between Dong Ying'er and the Chang family's third young master, Chang'an, had been decided since they were young. They were only waiting for the right age to arrange the marriage. The 2 children had a very good relationship since they were young. The Dong and Chang families were originally longtime friends. Madame Dong and Madame Chang were still close friends when they were still unmarried. With this marriage, they would naturally be even closer. Jean San's words were quite agreeable to Xiao Xiao's wishes. Xiao Xiao's cold and stiff expression became increasingly gentle. He seemed to have thought of something, and a trace of a smile flashed swiftly in his eyes, making his originally incomparably handsome appearance seem even more beautiful. Grand Tutor Lu is very concerned about Princess. After asking about Princess's situation today, he also asked about Princess's relationship with Master. Jean San said seriously, Grand Tutor Lu wants Princess to stay away from Master. Eat something. Madame Dong picked up the bird's nest and said, Look at you. You're so thin. When you return, apologize to your father. Your father will not blame you. It was a light sentence, but it clearly showed that this man was not in a good mood. Jean San's eyebrows jumped and he hurriedly said, Isn't that so? Princess also said the same thing. However, that Grand Tutor Lu is unreasonable and stubbornly refused to let Master go. Princess then had a big fight with him and Grand Tutor Lu was so angry that he left in a huff. Xiao Xiao's hands paused and he finally raised his head. A strange light flashed in his pitch-black eyes and he seemed to be a little uneasy as he asked, What are you doing? Undercurrents were surging in the palace but it was peaceful on the outside. Even if something big had happened, it would only be a topic for the common people to talk about. While the matter of Jiangli was being discussed enthusiastically by the people, another matter seemed insignificant. How can I be in the mood to eat these things? Madame Dong pushed the porcelain cup to one side and a look of worry appeared on her face. With such a thing happening, how can the Dong family still have any face in the Chang family? Master is furious again. I don't know why that La Xing is so stubborn this time and did such a thing. Sigh. Master Lin stroked his beard and said, Madam, I am feeling very happy. Once I think about how Xiang does not have to jump into that pit of fire, I am very happy. Speaking of this, it is also because of my incompetence as a father that I could not think of a solution at that time. If not for this unforeseen event, I would have to watch as my own daughter plunged into the abyss of suffering. I am truly ashamed. At this point, Master Lin revealed a frustrated expression. More than a month ago, Imperial Consort Chen in the palace had sent someone to discuss Lin Zixiang's marriage with him. She wanted to betroth Lin Zixiang to the third prince, Xian Yu. Everyone in the Great Jin dynasty knew what kind of person Xian Yu was. If Lin Zixiang were to marry Xian Yu, wouldn't her life be ruined? However, Imperial Consort Chen had used the entire Lin family as a threat. Imperial Consort Chen had always had a lot of face in front of the emperor. When the time came, she would say that the daughter of the capital governor actually looked down on the position of imperial consort. This would inevitably incur the emperor's wrath. Lin Zixiang was a sensitive person and went to ask Madame Lin what exactly had happened. Madame Lin was also unable to explain. Lin Zixiang's thoughts were clear. Although it was strange, she quickly put the matter to the back of her mind. Ever since Jiang Li's incident, Jiang Wan and Lin Zixiang had not seen each other for a long time. Lin Zixiang felt a little bored and thought that these few sisters should get together often. Madame Dong did not expect that Dong Yinger's sweetheart was actually the Great Jin dynasty's youngest war god, Jiang Xing. That maidservant did not dare to lie. From the looks of it, Jiang Xing had not done anything and it was just Dong Yinger's one-sided love. But as a woman, she would always want to save face. Dong Yinger's disregard of everything and sticking close to Jiang Xing caused Madame Dong, who came from a prestigious aristocratic family and scrupulously abided by etiquette, to feel extremely embarrassed. Dong Yinger had sunk so deeply into it, yet she did not know that this was an impossible marriage. Not to mention that Jiang Xing currently had no interest in Dong Yinger, just based on their status, it would be very difficult for Dong Yinger to marry Jiang Xing. The young man's fair face blushed slightly. After a moment, he seemed to have thought of something and his face turned ashen. He stood up abruptly. Lu Min dared to do such a thing. Jean Eyre blinked and asked, Master, should we tell this matter to young Junju? If Jiang Wan thought that this matter was done by Zhao Guang and the others, wouldn't the credit be stolen? Madame Dong only felt that her mind was a mess. She cursed fiercely in her heart and could only think of finding Dong Darren to discuss future matters. This matter was of great importance and she could not follow Dong Yinger. Seeing that Master Lin was thinking about these matters again, Madame Lin sighed and consoled him, How can you blame Master? This is all the will of the heavens. Even the heavens are helping our Xiang and not letting Xiang marry into those filthy places. This shows that our Xiang is blessed. No need. Xiao Xiao said indifferently. The personal maidservant jumped in fright and hurriedly knelt down and said, It is this maidservant who did not take good care of young Mississippi Madam, please punish me. Xiao Xiao said indifferently, I know. What kind of person was Jiang Xing? In recent years, he had repeatedly defeated the enemy. It was only a matter of time before Tianjin was defeated. On the day they returned to the court, Jiang Xing would be the greatest hero. The emperor had never been stingy with promoting capable people. At that time, Jiang Xing's status would rise steadily and there would be countless families who wanted to be related to him. What was a small capital magistrate to them? With Dong Yinger's stubbornness, she could only be Jiang Xing's concubine. However, if a dignified daughter of the D were to become someone else's concubine, wouldn't everyone laugh their heads off? Moreover, Although Dong Ying'er was willful since she was young, she still had some pride in her bones. If she knew of such an ending, she would not be able to bear it. Jean Wen and Jean Er bowed their heads in agreement. Xiao Xiao paused and asked, "Has the matter with Chen Liang been settled?" Madame Dong frowned. "What do you mean by the youngest hero of the great Jin dynasty? Do you fancy a military general? Master, why don't you personally make a trip to the palace?" Xiao Xiao was in a good mood and Jin San's courage grew. He boldly suggested, "The princess and you have not seen each other for a few days. As the saying goes, one day apart is like 3 autumns. A relationship must be maintained at all times. Besides, a woman's heart is always soft-hearted. What if Grand Tutor Lu goes to apologize to the princess in a few days? The princess becomes soft-hearted and their relationship becomes better. What will master do then?" The embroidered uniform guards valued their master's marriage more than anything else. This year, Xiao Xiao was used to having few desires. It wasn't easy for him to find a girl who was not bad. The embroidered uniform guards naturally wanted to help their master seize the initiative and recognize the situation. Official Dong had spent his entire life in the officialdom. He was astute and considerate. Not only did he have a good reputation, but he also had a good relationship with everyone. Who knew that his reputation would be ruined by his own daughter? No matter how much he doted on Dong Ying'er, he was truly angry this time. He locked Dong Ying'er up. Dong Ying'er steeled her heart and refused to admit her mistakes. The relationship between the father and daughter worsened. This caused Dong Furen to be caught in a dilemma. The third young master of the Chang family, Chang'an, had a sincere temperament. Since Dong Ying'er had said so, he naturally wouldn't force her. He went back and told his family that he didn't want to marry Dong Ying'er. The Chang family weren't stupid. They were curious as to why Chang'an would suddenly want to break off the engagement. In any case, they found out the whole story from Chang'an's mouth. They were so angry that they immediately sent people to find the capital governor's Fu. Xiao Xiao frowned. He thought of how Lu Min had clung on to Jiang Ruan and didn't let her go last time. Although he knew that Jiang Ruan wasn't the soft-hearted person that Jin San had described, she had helped Lu Min before. It was inevitable that they would have some friendship. When he thought of a person he wasn't familiar with taking his place, Xiao Xiao felt even more depressed. In Jinying Wang Fu, Xiao Xiao finished reading the letter in his hand. He casually placed the paper on the flame of an oil lamp and burned it. He called Jin 1 and Jin 2 over and said, "There have been no unusual movements in the capital recently. Pay attention to news from the southern border. These people are restraining themselves." Chapter 125. In the dream hall of the imperial palace, imperial concubine Chen reclined on the couch, but she no longer had her usual leisurely and otherworldly appearance. Her multicolored silk thread was thrown to the side halfway through. The complicated silk threads intertwined with each other, making one feel disgusted just by looking at it. "Old Chen, how is father?" Imperial consort Chen pressed her forehead. Chen Gonggang lowered his head. "Senior Duke. Not very good. Recently, the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of War have been thinking of ways to oppose him. Senior Duke is also very angry." Imperial consort Chen accidentally broke a snow jade porcelain bottle in front of her. "Zhao Guang, that old man. Recently, Minister Chen's work had not gone smoothly. Even if one thought with their toes, they would know that it was Zhao Guang's doing. The Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of War had some friendship with the General Fu. In particular, there were a few stubborn old men who loved to oppose the Chen family. These past few days, they had been so obviously provocative. They must have been instructed by Zhao Guang. Chen Gonggang frowned. He did not dare to agree with Imperial Consort Chen's thoughts. He hesitated and said, "In this servant's opinion, it may not be the General Fu who did it." "Oh." Imperial Consort Chen glanced at him. Apart from them, who else in the court would dare to so brazenly cause trouble for the Chen family? Only that group of stubborn martial artists in the General Fu would oppose the House of Duke. They did not think about it. In the future, the world would belong to her son. If she wanted to crush the General Fu, it would be as simple as crushing an ant. The General Fu's actions have always been direct and reckless. They lack consideration. According to Senior Duke's words, these few incidents have been swift and aggressive. Right now, her ladyship is only suspicious but unable to do anything. The people of the General Fu would not be so scheming. This servant boldly guesses that it was His Highness Jinying Wang who did it. Chen Gonggang analyzed. Jinying Wang. Imperial Consort Chen's voice suddenly became sharper. She was not as gentle and graceful as usual. She unconsciously became agitated. Impossible. After a while, she said, Jinying Wang has always been neutral in the court. Why would he oppose the Chen family for no reason? Chen Gonggang sighed. Was Jinying Wang really neutral? He had struggled in the palace for so many years, but Imperial Consort Chen was still a woman. If a woman wanted to understand the situation of the court, she would be at a disadvantage. Although Xiao Xiao had received the title of rebel and traitor, the emperor's regard for Xiao Xiao was not like how he would treat a surviving rebel. Although they did not know why, Xiao Xiao seemed to be outside of the imperial court all these years and did not side with them. In reality, his power was unfathomable. Who could know what he was thinking? In the past few days, it seemed that Xiao Xiao was very concerned about the eldest daughter of the Jiang family. Since Imperial Consort Chen had taken action and Xiao Xiao had ordered people to deliver Xian Yu's head, it was clear that he wanted to protect Jiang Wan. In that case, by suppressing the Chen family, wasn't he helping Hong and Commandery Princess vent her anger? What Chen Gonggang could think of, Imperial Concubine Chen could also think of. After a while, she gradually calmed down. Whenever she thought of how Xiao Xiao had made a move against the Chen family for Jiang Wan, an inexplicable sense of melancholy arose in her heart. In a fierce voice, she said, "What a good Jiang Wan, to actually provoke Jinying Wang to treat her differently." Chen Gonggang lowered his head and did not speak. In the palace, Imperial Consort Chen could be considered to have hidden her thoughts very deeply. As a close eunuch, Chen Gonggang was also aware of her hidden thoughts. Ever since she knew that Xiao Xiao and Jiang Ruan's relationship was not shallow, Imperial Consort Chen often lost her composure. This was not a good thing for her. He had the intention to remind her, but Imperial Consort Chen had always been a person with her own ideas and would not listen to his words. At this moment, the person who had caused the people of Contemplation Palace to lose their composure was staying in a corner of the palace. In the palace, there were people with ulterior motives everywhere. In her previous life, Jiang Wan had already experienced this. In this life, she had become a Junju, and those concubines who had always trampled on her had to flatter her when they saw her. Jiang Wan herself did not care much about these things. She only felt that everyone in the Jiang Fu was ugly and the palace was full of murderous intentions. It was very difficult to find a quiet place. The Empress Dowager knew that Jiang Wan liked peace and quiet, so she tidied up the side palace hall where Princess Yuan Rong had stayed before leaving the Fu and let Jiang Wan move in. This was also convenient. Moreover, Empress Dowager Ida's actions caused the people in the palace to ponder even more deeply. They thought that the current Hong and Junju really had a lot of face in front of the Empress Dowager. After Jiang Wan moved in, the things inside did not change in the slightest. The original appearance was still the same as it was now. Although Empress Dowager Ida looked cold and cheerless, in her heart, she had never forgotten about her daughter who had died young. Even after so many years, things were still as clean as new. Lu Zhu and Tian Zhu stayed by her side to serve her. After Tian Zhu's injuries had healed, she practiced martial arts more diligently every day. She also carried a large hidden weapon with her to guard against unexpected incidents. Lu Zhu went out early in the morning to pick flowers, but returned not long after. Tianzhu felt strange and asked, "Where are the flowers?" Lu Zhu's hands were empty, so she scratched her head and stammered, "Flowers. Flower, miss, Xiao Wangye is here." Jiang Wan almost spat out a mouthful of tea. Sure enough, she saw a figure flash behind Lu Zhu. Black embroidered clothes and a silver belt, who else could it be but Xiao Xiao? Tianzhu was also startled. Lu Zhu touched her nose and said very ashamed, "Miss, this servant was unable to stop him." With Lu Zhu's little ability, it was indeed a fantasy story for her to stop a person like Xiao Xiao. Jiang Wan put down the book in her hand and said, "I know." Lu Zhu winked at Tianzhu. Tianzhu hurriedly said, "This servant will withdraw first." Without waiting for Jiang Wan to speak, she left with Lu Zhu. As the door was closed, Jiang Wan glared at the two servant girls who left without hesitation. Her heart was filled with anger. These two people were increasingly looking down on her, their mistress, more and more. Her gaze fell on the handsome youth in front of her. Was this person crazy? Entering the palace so boldly, so what if he was seen? Moreover, now that a man and a woman were sharing a room, he could come and go more and more freely. Xiao Xiao did not see Jiang Ruan's expression. He walked to the small table and sat down. After a pause, he took out a bag from his bosom and put it on the table. "What is it?" "Ointment." Xiao Xiao said, "The jade muscle ointment is gone. Applying this herbal medicine will not leave a scar." Jiang Wan was stunned. She had not thought that he had specially come to deliver the ointment. For a moment, she did not know what to say. Xiao Xiao frowned without batting an eyelid. In fact, he had not come to deliver the ointment. He had only listened to Jin San's words and did not know why he had come here. Fortunately, he did not see Lu Min, which made his mood a little better. After a moment of silence, he said, "The selection of the new beauties is about to begin. Jiang Quan has prepared a portrait of Jiang Dan." Thinking of the spy who had returned and reported what Jiang Quan had said in the Fu, Xiao Xiao felt a chill run down his spine. Jiang Quan had said that if Jiang Wan was not already a Junju, she would have been the best candidate to enter the palace. The emperor had clearly indicated that the Jiang family had to produce a candidate for the selection. Jiang Su Su was his most beloved daughter, so he could not allow her to suffer. Moreover, Jiang Li and Jiang Dan were Shu daughters. Since Jiang Wan held the title of Di daughter, the Jiang Fu had raised her for so many years. Who knew that heaven's will was unpredictable? Now that Jiang Wan was a Junju, she could no longer enter the palace. Jiang Su Su's reputation had been tarnished. Even if he was willing, the imperial family would not allow such a slap in the face. Jiang Li was already married. No matter how he thought about it, only Jiang Dan could be of use. He had no choice but to hand over Jiang Dan's portrait. Xiao Xiao frowned. He knew that Jiang Ruan's days in the Jiang Fu were not easy. Otherwise, how could she have been sent to the rural residence right after the death of her mother? But he had never thought that Jiang Quan would be so ruthless. How could he treat his own daughter? Jiang Wan said, "Fourth younger sister is going to enter the palace." "That's good. With fourth younger sister's ability, you will be able to find a good future in the palace." Jiang Dan was a person who was used to being subservient. She was also vicious and merciless. She appeared to be completely innocent, but in reality, she was the most hateful. Such a person was most suited to survive in the palace. A smile appeared on Jiang Ruan's face. Jiang Quan had personally released a wolf cub, but he did not know that there would be a time in the future when it would be bitten to death by a vicious wolf. Xiao Xiao glanced at her and said, "Now that Chen Fei sees you as a thorn in her side, I will leave Jin Er and Jin San by your side." Jiang Wan was stunned. To tell the truth, this was undoubtedly very tempting. After the previous incident, she had already considered it. Although on the surface, it seemed that she had the upper hand, her status could not contend with Chen Fei. Moreover, she did not have anyone to rely on, nor did she have the ability to deploy troops. If she were to use force, she might not necessarily be able to gain any advantage. One person from Tianzhu would inevitably not be enough. If there were Jin Air and Jin San, at least if something happened, they could think of a way to pass on the news. This would also be a form of insurance. She owed Xiao Xiao too many favors. Jiang Wan hesitated and said, "I have a question to ask you." Xiao Xiao looked at her with some doubt in his eyes. "At that time, you said that you owed me a life. What did you mean?" Jiang Wan asked. Xiao Xiao stared blankly and pursed his lips unnaturally. A trace of redness crept onto his face, and his cold and stiff expression also revealed a rare hint of awkwardness. Originally, it was nothing, but now that Jiang Wan had said this, he did not know what to say. "Forget it." Just as he was about to speak, Jiang Ruan's voice sounded, "Now is not the time to pursue this matter." "Thank you very much, Xiao Xiao." She had always called him Xiao Wangye left and Xiao Wangye right, but now she no longer called him by that jerky and alienating title, and directly called him Xiao Xiao. This should have been unreasonable and could even be called presumptuous. However, Xiao Xiao inexplicably had a strange feeling in his heart. It was as if a small stone had been thrown into a tranquil deep pool, causing slight ripples. He had never thought that these two words from her mouth would have a different feeling from hearing it from someone else's mouth. Jiang Wan saw that he did not speak and raised her eyes to look at him. Coincidentally, she saw a trace of a smile flash across those cold, star-like eyes. Stunned, she asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Xiao Xiao was in a good mood. After thinking for a bit, he took out a bracelet from his bosom and handed it to her. The bracelet emitted a faint blue light. It was the blood moon bracelet from before. Xiao Xiao explained, "There are new needles inside, and it has been tempered with poison." He was so thoughtful. Jiang Wan took it and looked at it carefully. It would seem superfluous to say thank you, so she directly put it on her wrist. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes. In reality, there was not much he could do for Jiang Wan. If the embroidered uniform guards were dispatched, there would inevitably be deaths. He was not willing to get entangled with the court. If he really made a move, he would certainly hit the target, and the entire Chen family would lose their lives. He could kill people, but Jiang Wan might not like it. There was too much darkness in her eyes. Only by killing her enemies with her own hands could she use fresh blood to wash away that darkness. Outside the door, Lu Zhu widened her eyes in shock. "Xiao Wangye sent you to protect Miss." Jin Air crossed his arms and looked at Lu Zhu calmly, "Yes, little girl. In the future, we will have fun." Heaven knew that ever since the last time Lu Zhu had unhesitatingly kicked his family jewels, he had been brooding over it. Xiao Xiao had originally asked Jin 1 and Jin 3 to protect Jiang Wan, but he had taken the initiative to ask for a change of mission. Wasn't it to avenge that kick? Dewdrop spat, "Shameless. Why would Xiao Wangye send a pretty boy like you to protect Miss? Is it good enough that you can protect your family jewels? And you still want to protect Miss? Dream on." Jin Air almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He was a dignified embroidered uniform guard with an elegant demeanor. Unexpectedly, he had been called a pretty boy by a little girl. This girl had such a sharp tongue. She was much more shrewish than the female secret guards of the embroidered uniform guards. She was like a little hoodlum in the marketplace. His expression changed and he suddenly lowered his head to approach Lu Zhu. With an evil smile, he said, "So what if I'm a pretty boy? At least I'm much better than a bean sprout like you." Jin Air was not bad in the first place, and Lu Zhu was only a young girl in her teens. When she saw Jin Air's approaching smile, she blushed a little. When she suddenly heard his words, she was so angry that her nose almost became crooked. Without hesitation, she kicked him again. However, this time, Jane Eyre was already prepared. He grabbed her leg and said, "Little girl, don't be so rude. Be careful that you won't be able to marry in the future. Get lost." Lecture. Lu Zhu was so angry that she swung her hand to slap him. Jane Eyre only grabbed Lu Zhu's leg. He didn't expect that a woman's mind would always be unfathomable. That slap landed squarely on his face. The little head of the embroidered uniform guards had been slapped in the face by a maidservant who didn't know any martial arts. It was an extraordinary shame and humiliation. Jane Eyre was also exasperated. Who's the lecher? Even if someone wants to ascend the throne, it won't be you. I don't fancy that small body of yours that looks like a stick of firewood. Jin San and Tian Zhu stood on one side. Tian Zhu was naturally calm while Jin San was overjoyed. He flipped his long hair and his charming eyes were filled with the expression of someone watching a good show. TSK, the maidservant by young madam's side is truly extraordinary. It's rare to see Jane Eyre being humiliated like this. Jane C should come and watch as well. She rolled her eyes and thought to herself, it feels like spring has arrived for the entire embroidered uniform guards with young madam's arrival. In contrast to the relaxed and cheerful atmosphere in this corner of the palace, there were other places that were gloomy. For example, the physician's residence. In a room in the courtyard, Jiang Li sat quietly on a chair. The maidservant beside her placed the medicine in her hands on the table and twisted her waist as she said, "Madam, it's time to take your medicine." The maidservant was dressed in a peach-pink robe. Her waist was not slender and her makeup was exquisite, making her look even more delicate. Her attitude was not very respectful and all 10 of her fingers were smeared with red nail polish. She placed the medicine bowl on the table and glanced at the person on the bed. She said in a coquettish voice, "Madam, it's better to take your medicine as soon as possible so that I don't have to worry when I look back." Jiang Li strenuously looked at her and said in a hoarse voice, "Get out of here." The maidservant rolled her eyes at her and bowed disrespectfully before leaving. Before she left, she said in a small voice, "Who does she think she is? Does she really think that she's the mistress of the physician's residence? She's just a used shoe." That voice traveled faintly into Jiang Li's ears. Jiang Li was so angry that she threw the medicine bowl in her hands onto the ground. Slut! That maidservant was the maidservant she had brought from the Jiang Fu as a dowry. Who knew that such a thing would happen after just a few days of marriage? Zhujiang hated her and this personal maidservant took the opportunity to climb into Zhujiang's bed. If she was not pregnant, Zhujiang would have immediately made her his concubine. Now that she was pregnant, Jiang Li let out a bitter laugh. Her gaze fell on the bowl of medicine that had been smashed on the floor. It should have been a great thing for her to be pregnant not long after she entered the residence. However, it just had to happen after that incident. She did not know whether the child in her belly was Zhujiang's or the third Prince Xian Yu's. Whether it was Zhujiang's or Xian Yu's, she did not dare to abort it. She had to protect the seed in her belly. The imperial family could not be provoked, and the people of the Zhua Fu knew this very well. They fed her the medicine, but wantonly humiliated her. Old Madame Zhua wished that she could die immediately and ruin Zhujiang's future and reputation. Zhujiang, needless to say, looked at her every day as if she was his enemy. That man was the devil. He looked gentle and refined, but he used all kinds of tricks to torture her. Jiang Li smiled bitterly. How did it become like this? It shouldn't be like this. She struggled to find the bronze mirror beside her pillow. The person in the mirror looked haggard. She was clearly a young girl, but she looked like an old woman of 30. Her skin was yellow and dull, and she was so thin that she was out of shape. Her eyes were dim, and they were embedded in her bony face. She looked disgusting at first glance, and there was no trace of her former beauty. She threw the bronze mirror on the ground in disgust and began to cry. She had thought that after marrying into the doctor's residence, she would become an official's wife and step on everyone else. From then on, she would completely get rid of her status as a concubine's daughter. Who knew that today, a maidservant could bully her? It shouldn't be like this. This should have been Jiang Dan's life. Jiang Li curled her body into a ball. If she had not snatched Jiang Dan's marriage, the person who would be married into the doctor's residence would be Jiang Dan. The person who would be ravaged like this would be Jiang Dan. She thought that she had snatched a happy marriage, but who knew that it was the road to the Yellow Springs? She hated Jiang Dan, hated Zhuo Jiang, hated Xianyu, hated her personal maidservant, and hated Jiang Yuan, who had caused everything that had happened today. Now, giving birth to a child would mean death. Moreover, she did not want to give birth to this vile spawn that represented humiliation. Jiang Li's eyes glowed with a fanatical light. If she died, the child in her belly would also die. The imperial family would certainly not let the doctor's residence off, and Zhuo Jiang would not be able to raise his head. If that was the case, it would be much better than now. At least she could make the doctor's residence unhappy, and make Zhuo Jiang unhappy. She felt a trace of satisfaction in her heart. She rolled off the bed and shakily picked up the broken pieces of porcelain. She muttered, "If there is an afterlife, I will definitely not let you off." Chapter 126. Early in the morning, an uninvited guest arrived at the princess palace where Jiang Yuan resided. Lu Zhu lifted the curtain and looked at Jiang Yuan, who had just finished washing up and stood up. "Miss, Beauty Wang has come to deliver the clothes for the imperial astronomer's religious ceremony tomorrow." When the imperial astronomer held a religious ceremony, the womenfolk in the palace also had to participate, and their clothes were also very particular. However, they were all delivered by the people from the Department of Clothing. This was the first time an imperial concubine of the emperor had come to deliver. Although it wasn't against the rules, his attitude was a little too friendly. Lu Zhu obviously thought the same and said, "This servant remembers that Miss does not have any friendship with this Beauty Wang." Jiang Yuan brushed away the small blanket beside her and said, "What do you think of Beauty Wang? She looks amiable and speaks very straightforwardly." Lu Zhu thought for a moment. However, those who are unaccountably solicitous are hiding evil intentions. Miss should be more careful. Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, "It's good that you know." Although Lu Zhu was clever, she had a kind nature and did not know what kind of place the palace was. If the Jiang Fu was said to be a wolf's den, then the palace was a tiger's den. How could there be lambs living in a tiger's den? For example, this Beauty Wang. She slowly raised a smile. She did not know what it would be like to see her again after so many years. "Let's go and meet this Beauty Wang." As they walked to the front hall, they heard a warm and somewhat cheerful voice, "Hong and Junju." Jiang Yuan looked up and saw palace maids attending to a young woman in the prime of her youth. She wore a silk dress embroidered with gold and silver threads and had her hair combed into a tassel bun. It was neither cumbersome nor overly plain. Her pretty face was bright and confident, and her smile was as sincere as fire. This appearance made it easy for people to have a good impression of her. They only felt that this person's thoughts were clear and straightforward. The woman looked at Jiang Yuan and stood up to pay her respects. She smiled and said, "I already knew that Junju was born with unparalleled beauty. Originally, I thought that the clothes for the religious ceremony were too plain. Seeing Junju's elegant demeanor, I expected that Junju would also wear the most splendid colors. As a woman, how could she not love to hear her appearance praised?" If it was someone else who heard these words, they would probably feel close to this woman as well. Jiang Yuan only glanced at her indifferently and smiled warmly, "Beauty Wang need not be so polite." He actually changed the topic, as if he didn't hear the overly enthusiastic praise. Beauty Wang stared blankly. She had not expected that Jiang Yuan would have such a reaction. Her brows furrowed but very quickly relaxed. Jiang Yuan sat down on the soft couch and Beauty Wang also sat down. She instructed a palace maid to bring over a small wooden chest containing the clothes and said, "These are the clothes that were sent over from the Ce Palace. When concubine was returning, I was going to pass by here, so I brought them over to Junju. Junju won't blame concubine for being nosy, right?" A trace of disdain flashed through Lu Zhu's eyes. She came from the streets, so she was very familiar with the roads. After a few days in the palace, she had already figured out who lived in every place in the palace. Beauty Wang's courtyard was thousands of miles away from here. On the way, who was he trying to fool? Beauty Wang's kind intentions, why would I blame you? Jiang Yuan said indifferently. It seemed that she did not expect Jiang Yuan to be such a thorn, unmoved by force or persuasion. If it was someone else, they would not have been so distant. Beauty Wang could not think of how she had offended this Junju. Presumably, it was because of Jiang Yuan's temperament. She paused and laughed, "Why are you calling me so distant? I am a few years older than Junju. If Junju doesn't mind, how about calling me Junju Mimi? When Junju looks at me like this, I really look like the little sister in my fu." Jiang Yuan glanced at her with a smile that was not a smile. "Beauty Wang, etiquette cannot be abolished." Taking the tea that Lu Zhu handed to her, Jiang Yuan took a sip. After seeing enough of the wonderful expression on Beauty Wang's face, Jiang Yuan said, "This Junju only has an older brother, but I don't have an older sister." Beauty Wang clenched her fists tightly and smiled extremely reluctantly. "It is concubine who has been rude." Jiang Yuan smiled and did not speak, which made Beauty Wang feel even more helpless. Everyone in the palace knew that she was straightforward and sincere. Most of the concubines were on good terms with her, and she was considerate and thoughtful. She did not expect that today, she would run into a snag with Jiang Yuan. She looked at Jiang Yuan's beautiful face, and a trace of jealousy flashed in her eyes. Lu Zhu also felt a little strange. Although Jiang Yuan usually treated people coldly and alienated, she would not show it so obviously on her face. In the end, she would leave some leeway. It was the first time that she faced a strange concubine coldly like today. Jiang Yuan put the lid back on the rim of the cup, and memories of her previous life surfaced in her mind. This Beauty Wang was also considered a capable person in the palace. Among a group of women, her beauty could only be considered average, and she did not have much power. However, by virtue of her personality, she managed to become a beauty. When she was conferred the title of Beauty Yuan, this Beauty Wang specially came to congratulate her. Later, she was given the cold shoulder, and when the other concubines came to trample on her, only Beauty Wang comforted her every day. She also used to regard Beauty Wang as a trustworthy person until one day, when Pei was seriously ill. She went to ask for an imperial physician to treat him, but inadvertently heard Beauty Wang instruct the imperial physician to ignore her. It turned out that Beauty Wang saw that she was beautiful and was afraid that one day, she would gain the upper hand. People in the palace were used to stepping on the weak and flattering the strong. On the surface, Beauty Wang acted like a close sister, but behind her back, she did not hesitate to stab her with a knife. She just did not know what happened to her in her previous life. But now, looking at this person who she once thought she could trust, she felt that every move was a shoddy act. At first glance, she felt disgusted and did not even have the mood to play along. In the end, Beauty Wang was also considered a character in the palace. When had she ever suffered such a cold face for no reason? Seeing Jiang Yuan's indifferent appearance, she secretly resented her, but did not continue to humiliate herself. She stood up and said, "Now that the clothes have been delivered, Junju should at least take a look. If there is anything wrong, when you return, let the people in the Ce Palace Hall change it." "No need," Jiang Yuan smiled, "I trust the clothes that Beauty Wang personally handled." These words were nothing, but Beauty Wang felt that there seemed to be a special meaning in those words. Subconsciously, she looked at Jiang Ruan and met Jiang Ruan's bright eyes. There seemed to be a hint of mockery in those eyes, which startled Beauty Wang. She quickly turned her head away and hurriedly said, "If that's the case, then this concubine will take her leave first." Jiang Ruan glanced at her lightly and did not get up to send her off. She only instructed Du Zhu, send Beauty Wang off. After Beauty Wang left, Jiang Ruan opened the small wooden box on the table and picked up a palace satin plain white silk dress from inside. When the imperial astronomer performed rituals, the clothes were divided into several grades according to their grade, and they could not be made too brightly colored. This dress was plain and clean. If Jiang Su saw it, she would definitely like it very much, because it made her, a little white flower, look even more lovely in moving, elegant and refined. As for Jiang Ruan, she threw the dress to Tianzhu. "Is there anything wrong with it?" Tianzhu put the dress under her nose and sniffed it. She frowned slightly and pondered for a while. Then, she walked to the side and picked up an oil lamp, lighting it with a match. Then, she took the dress and put it on the oil lamp to smoke it for a while. After a while, a trace of red gradually appeared on the snow-white dress. There was more and more red, like blood seeping out from the fabric. The more one looked at it, the more frightening it became. Jiang Ruan was not surprised and only asked, "What is this?" "By Luo Xiang." "The hotter it is, the redder it becomes," Tianzhu said coldly. Jiang Ruan nodded in understanding. When the imperial astronomer performed rituals, it was inevitable that there would be some incense. Once the Bai Luo Xiang was lit in the main hall, and her dress had such a blood-red color, she would definitely be locked up as an evildoer. The ending could be imagined. It had to be said that this kind of thing was extremely sinister. The emperor had always attached importance to such things. If he made a fuss about this matter, he could indeed put her to death. If someone like Tianzhu was not by her side, she would definitely not have discovered the problem. Tianzhu asked, "Master, do you want to change it?" "There is no need to beat the grass and startle the snake," Jiang Ruan said indifferently. "This dress is so valuable, it cannot be wasted. Since others have sent such a good gift, it is only natural that we return the favor." She smiled coldly. "I also want to see who will emerge as the winner of this ritual." After Beauty Wang left, she first returned to her own small building. After resting for a while, she pretended to unintentionally wander to the Hall of Dreams. The palace maids of the Hall of Dreams welcomed her in. When Beauty Wang entered the hall, Imperial Consort Chen was leaning on a soft woolen couch and tying her hair. Beauty Wang had always been curious as to why Imperial Consort Chen, who was in such a high position, still tied her hair like an ordinary woman. Now, it seemed that she somewhat understood why the emperor favored Imperial Consort Chen. It was because any man who entered the Hall of Dreams would see a woman who was like an ordinary young married woman, gently tying her hair. It was as if all worries and troubles had gone far away, leaving only the tranquility and elegance of this corner of Jiangnan. However, a trace of ridicule flashed in Beauty Wang's eyes. The woman in a man's eyes and the woman in a woman's eyes were naturally different. The imperial consort Chen that the emperor saw was gentle, elegant, graceful, and aloof from worldly affairs. However, the imperial consort Chen in Beauty Wang's eyes was brimming with ambition and extremely frightening. "You've come, sit." Imperial consort Chen smiled and pointed to the seat next to her, looking very amiable. "Qiashan does not dare." Beauty Wang also smiled and only said, "The clothes have already been sent over." Oh, Imperial Consort Chen did not even raise her head and continued to seriously tie her hair, her 10 fingers flying in the silk thread. "What do you think of Hong and Junju?" "She is not someone who is easy to get close to," Beauty Wang thought for a moment. "Qiashan wants to be more intimate with her, but Junju always gives me the cold shoulder. That is why Qiashan left early." Junju's expression was very scary. After listening to Beauty Wang's words, Imperial Consort Chen raised her head from the silk thread and looked at Beauty Wang with some surprise. She smiled and said, "This is strange. That Hong and Junju has always been a gentle person and would not easily treat others coldly. Since she is well-mannered, why would she treat Mimi like this? It seems that Mimi Wang must have done something wrong to make our Junju unhappy." Beauty Wang smiled, "Perhaps it is so. Xia Shen is slow-witted." In his heart, however, he was thinking that if Hong and Junju was a person with a gentle appearance, then the one in front of him was the true smiling tiger. Usually, she looked gentle and harmless, but many women in the inner palace had been defeated by her hands. Imperial Consort Chen smiled with satisfaction, "So, it has been hard on Mimi Wang this time. Mimi has been doing her best in the palace every day. When I go back and see His Majesty, I will put in a good word for Mimi." Xia Shen thanks Jijia. Beauty Wang smiled and said a few words to Imperial Consort Chen. Her words were lively but respectful. Indeed, after a while, Imperial Consort Chen was very happy. Beauty Wang only got up and left when it was dark. After Beauty Wang left, Chen Gonggang walked in front of Imperial Consort Chen and asked, "Nyang Nyang, this servant has inquired. The clothes were kept by Hong and Junju and nothing was found." "Good." Imperial Consort Chen raised her hand and looked at the bright red nail polish on her white and tender fingers. "I want to see who can save her this time. The Zhao family might cause trouble in the future." Chen Gonggang reminded. "There is Wang Yi, that idiot." Imperial Consort Chen said lightly, "It has nothing to do with us." That night, many people in the palace were sleepless, but Jiang Wan slept early. Gugu Yang, who served the Empress Dowager, came over once and explained to her what to pay attention to when the imperial astronomer performed the ritual. Jiang Wan complied and Gugu Yang carefully instructed Tian Zhu and Lu Zhu before returning to the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. This was the first time the imperial astronomer performed the ritual of observing the stars at night. Being in charge of the good and bad luck of the year, the emperor attached great importance to this matter and all the palace women had to participate. Regardless of others, Jiang Ruan's day was as usual. Other than Lu Zhu quarreling with Jean Eyre, who had been transferred over by Xiao Xiao, everything else was very peaceful. In the evening, when it was time to preside over the ritual, Jiang Wan changed into the clothes that Beauty Wang had sent to the Ce Palace last night. After Lu Zhu helped her freshen up, she followed the young eunuch who led the way to the Celestial Observatory platform. Jiang Wan followed behind the palace women. Although her relationship with the Empress Dowager was not shallow, the women in the palace still faintly isolated her. On the other hand, Princess Rongya and Xu Fei's daughter, Princess Yi, were high and aloof. They were surrounded by a group of imperial concubines and spoke to them like pearls in the palm. At the forefront of the womenfolk were Empress Dowager Ida and the Empress, followed by Imperial Concubine Chen, Concubine De, Xu Fei, and Xian Fei. At the male side of the banquet were the princes and the princes, with the emperor sitting at the highest position. Empress Dowager Ida saw that Jiang Wan was left behind by the palace women and frowned slightly. She said coldly, "Hongnan, come to Aijiao." Jiang Wan stepped forward. Princess Rongya and Princess Yi's eyes flashed with jealousy at the same time. Only then did the men seem to notice Jiang Wan. Jiang Wan walked up to Empress Dowager Ida. Empress Dowager Ida reached out to hold her hand. Such an intimate appearance shocked everyone. Although they knew that Jiang Wan was favored, Empress Dowager Ida was cold and aloof. Such an intimate action was something that even Princess Yuanrong had rarely received. Jiang Wan smiled. Her gaze fell on a familiar figure at the men's banquet. She could not help but be slightly startled. The black brocade robe was clearly Xiao Xiao. Only members of the imperial family could participate in the imperial astronomer's religious ceremony. Why was Xiao Xiao also here? Xiao Xiao was also stunned when he saw Jiang Wan. Jiang Yuan was dressed in a white silk dress made of palace satin. Her jet-black hair was coiled into a gourd bun with a white jade hairpin. She did not have any ornaments, nor did she have any makeup on. Jiang Yuan had always preferred bright red clothes. Tomorrow, she would present herself in a bright and moving image. But now, she was so plain and clean, as if she had been washed clean. She was different from Jiang Su's delicate and charming appearance. Jiang Yuan's white dress actually made her gentle smile appear somewhat cold and detached. Her faintly discernible upturned eyes seemed to contain a trace of sharp mockery. If the red-clothed Jiang Yuan was said to be a red fox, then the white-clothed Jiang Yuan was like a nimble snake. The word pitiful had nothing to do with her. Instead, there was a kind of frightening coldness. A blood-red plum blossom suddenly turned into a snow-white pear blossom. Many people's gazes were already on her. Xianli was no exception. He looked at Jiang Yuan with a somewhat absent-minded gaze. He felt that this woman was so otherworldly and different from other women that he could not help but want to make her his own. It was a very beautiful thing to see that indifferent gaze infatuated with him. The emperor's eyes also flashed with a trace of amazement. However, Jiang Yuan was still too young and too cold. Men always liked a softer temperament. The emperor had never liked Jiang Yuan. On the contrary, Imperial Consort Chen looked at Jiang Yuan and revealed a faint smile. Beauty Yuan also looked at Jiang Yuan from afar. She did not know why, but tonight her heart was beating very fiercely, as if she had an ominous premonition. When she saw that Jiang Yuan was indeed wearing the white silk dress made of palace satin, she was relieved. As long as she wore this dress, and the Ce Palace had not made any other dresses, today's matter was absolutely safe. Jiang Yuan slightly raised the corners of her lips. Seeing that the emperor had announced the start of the ceremony, the people of the imperial astronomer burned incense and washed their hands. Green smoke slowly rose from the huge incense burner. Hui Ju, dressed in a monk's robe, stood beside the supervisor, silently chanting scriptures with a benevolent look on his face. Ling Tai Lang was measuring the stars when he heard a dong sound. The huge tortoise shell placed at the front suddenly split open from the middle, and a sudden crack appeared on the shell. Great misfortune. The supervisor's eyes widened and he wanted to say something, but his voice was interrupted. Not good, Your Excellency. It was the registrar of the Imperial Astronomer's records. With a panicked expression, he staggered over from the observatory and said, 2 stars accompanying the moon, 2 stars accompanying the moon. Great misfortune. The emperor stood up and asked in a low voice, what happened? The registrar of the Imperial Astronomer suddenly knelt on the ground and repeatedly kowtowed, Your Majesty, 2 stars accompanying the moon, a great misfortune. What? The emperor frowned. The Imperial Astronomer had been performing rituals for so many years, but since he ascended the throne, this was the first time he had encountered an image of a great misfortune. After steadying himself, he said, Explain clearly to me, what is 2 stars accompanying the moon? The supervisor seemed to have recovered from his shock and knelt down, replying to Your Majesty, 2 stars accompanying the moon is a great misfortune. The country's demon star is the calamity of the country's demise. Demon star. It was Imperial Consort Chen who spoke. She tilted her head in confusion, what demon star? The person who brings chaos to the country. The supervisor wiped his sweat, this person is the reincarnation of the demon star. 2 stars accompanying the moon is a warning from the heavens, an omen of the country's demise. Then where is the demon star? Imperial Consort Chen seemed a little nervous. The heavens are merciful, perhaps they will send down a warning. This subject is willing to burn a joss stick and ask the heavens for their will. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. Finally. She had waited. Chapter 127. Your Majesty. Imperial Consort Chen looked at the emperor. Although she did not say anything, there was some worry in her bright eyes. It was as if she was really worried about the world. The Empress moved her lips and a trace of helplessness flashed across her face. She remained silent. "All right, we will now watch you burn the incense," the Emperor said to the supervisor. The chief supervisor lowered his head and ordered his subordinates to bring out the cherishing wishing incense. The cherishing wishing incense was made to be extremely thick, about the size of a small pillar. The emperors of the past would only burn the cherishing wishing incense to ask the heavens when they encountered a great omen. The incense was lit and the observatory was suddenly surrounded by warm smoke. The supervisor knelt down and kowtowed 3 times to the incense, saying, "The heavens bless us, the heavens send a warning. Today, there are 2 stars accompanying the moon, the demon star has appeared. May the heavens know and inform us of the demon star's location." The green eyes curled up and gradually submerged in the darkness of the night. Jiang Yuan smiled and folded her hands in front of her chest. The wind gently lifted her long black hair. She was dressed in white and her face was beautiful enough to topple a city. However, she was like a beautiful evil spirit from hell, descending with hatred. Xiao Xiao's gaze fell on the kowtowing supervisor and his expression slightly paused. Suddenly, there was a cry of surprise from the crowd. Imperial Consort Chen's eyes slowly relaxed, like the overflowing spring water of Jiangnan, full of warmth and joy. "Sister Wang, why are you?" The voice gradually became louder. The smile in Imperial Consort Chen's eyes stopped. But she saw that the womenfolk were already panicking and retreated, leaving Beauty Wang alone in the middle. At this moment, her plain dress was completely red from top to bottom. It was as shocking as blood, and the color was still expanding, gradually expanding from her chest to her entire body. It was as if she had been fished out of a pool of blood. The palace attendants fled in panic, leaving only Beauty Wang to randomly pat her dress and murmur, "How can this be? No, how can this be?" Imperial Consort Chen suddenly looked down at Jiang Yuan, who was beside Empress Dowager Ida. Jiang Yuan seemed to sense her gaze and turned her head to look at her, revealing a slight smile. The smile was gentle and self-contained, brightening her charming face in an instant, but her eyes seemed to contain endless ridicule and provocation. Jiang Yuan nodded at her. Imperial Consort Chen's body was somewhat stiff. The emperor said angrily, "Demoness! Capture her." The guards swarmed forward and subdued Beauty Wang without much effort. Beauty Wang did not expect that she would suddenly encounter such an unforeseen event. At this moment, her mind was already in a mess. After being captured, he shouted unwillingly, "Your Majesty! Your Majesty! This concubine is innocent, this concubine is innocent." Empress Shu clutched her chest and said, "What injustice! Everyone has seen the warning from the heavens. It's clearly you, the fiend star's scourge. It really scared me to death." Your Majesty, Beauty Wang knew that once she was identified as the fiend star, her fate would be tragic. Her gaze fell on Empress Dowager Ida, who was not far from the emperor. Jiang Yuan's white clothes were clean and spotless, without a trace of blood on them. What was going on? Originally, it should have been Jiang Yuan. How did it become her? Beauty Wang was suddenly enlightened. It must have been Jiang Yuan. She must have tampered with the clothes. Otherwise, how could the person in the accident have changed his height? Your Majesty, it was Hong and Junju who framed me. Beauty Wang gritted her teeth and said, "It was Hong and Junju. She did something to this concubine's clothes. Your Majesty, I'm really innocent." "Shut up." It was Empress Dowager Ida who shouted coldly, "Nonsense, what does it have to do with Hong'an? This matter concerns Hong'an's innocence. Beauty Wang must demand an explanation." Hong'an is not afraid of confronting Beauty Wang. Jiang Yuan bowed to the emperor on the high seat, "Imperial father, yesterday, Beauty Wang brought Ce Palace's clothes to this son's palace and this son received them. But according to Beauty Wang's words, this son framed Beauty Wang. Beauty Wang's clothes did not go through this son's hands. She looked at Beauty Wang with a smile that was not a smile and said, Hong'an wants to ask Beauty Wang, how did you frame Beauty Wang? Beauty Wang's clothes have nothing to do with Hong'an. From the moment they entered the observatory until now, Hong'an has been keeping a distance from Beauty Wang. If Beauty Wang wants to say that you framed me, please show me the evidence. Otherwise, it will be nonsense. After a round of questioning, Beauty Wang was left speechless. Yes, she was the one who brought the clothes to Jiang Ruan and Jiang Ruan did not touch her clothes. But she did not know how, in the end, she was the one who got into trouble. Could it be? Beauty Wang suddenly looked at Imperial Consort Chen. It was her. Imperial Consort Chen saw Beauty Wang's expression clearly and called her an idiot in her heart. She looked back coldly. Beauty Wang met that pair of indifferent eyes and could not help but shiver. Her whole family still relied on Imperial Consort Chen to support them. If she angered Imperial Consort Chen, the whole Fu would not have a good life. He could only swallow this grievance in silence. It was just that it was really bitter to swallow. She knelt down and thought that since she was going to die anyway, she might as well end her own life instead of being treated as a demon and tortured to death. Suddenly, she went crazy and bit the guard who was holding her. The guard saw that she was gradually calming down and relaxed his vigilance. Caught off guard, he was bitten. Before he could stop her, Beauty Wang had already pulled out the guard's saber and slid it across her neck. No one expected that she would suddenly make such a move. A line of blood splattered and Beauty Wang's body fell softly. Her eyes were wide open, but they were looking in Jiang Ruan's direction. As a result, everyone's eyes were focused on Jiang Ruan. They only felt that Beauty Wang had died with grievances. Even if Jiang Ruan's questioning was flawless, at this moment, it was inevitable that there would be some doubts. Xiao Xiao's gaze turned cold. This was Beauty Wang's purpose. Even if she had to pay with her life, she wanted to splash a layer of dirty water on Jiang Ruan. Perhaps, Imperial Consort Chen would look after the Wang family after her death because of her dedication. The guard stepped forward to check Beauty Wang's breath and knelt down to beg for forgiveness. The emperor was furious. Firstly, he was angry that he had seen blood while observing the stars. Secondly, the appearance of a demon in the country was inauspicious. He looked at the supervisor who was already scared stiff and asked, "What should we do about this matter?" The supervisor was startled. When he regained his senses, his body could not help but tremble even more violently. Today's matter should not have turned out like this. When the so-called demon became Beauty Wang, things got out of hand. The current situation was something he had not expected and he did not know how to end it. However, he still had to put on an act, so he said in a trembling voice, "Replying to your Majesty, the demon has died. The heavens will bless the common people of the Jin dynasty." The emperor was obviously not satisfied with this answer. He looked at Hui Ju, who had been standing silently at the side, and asked, "State Preceptor, what do you think?" Hui Ju sighed, a look of pity appeared on his face, he slowly walked to the front of Beauty Wang's corpse, his hands caressed Beauty Wang's eyes, when he took his hands away, the eyes that were originally open in death were already closed. He silently closed his eyes, put his palms together, and seemed to be chanting a rebirth mantra. After he finished chanting, he faced the corpse and bowed, "Amitabha Buddha." However, Xu Fei could not bear to see this and said in a sweet voice, "Although State Preceptor is merciful, how can he worship a demon? The death of such a demon is not to be pitied. Isn't State Preceptor's chanting of the rebirth mantra a disaster for the entire Jin dynasty?" "Shut up." The emperor was furious. He had always trusted Hui Ju, so he naturally would not refute his actions. Hui Ju sighed, turned to the emperor, and bowed, "Your Majesty, this benefactor is not the demon. What do you mean? The emperor hurriedly asked. The supervisor on the ground could not help but tremble. Imperial Consort Chen, who was seated, paused and raised her eyes to look in Jiang Ruan's direction. Jiang Ruan stood quietly beside Empress Dowager Ida. When she heard Hui Ju's words, her expression did not change, as if nothing could enter her ears. The smile on her lips seemed to be engraved, gentle and harmless, but it sent chills down one's spine. Imperial Consort Chen's heart sank, and she had a bad premonition. Hui Ju shook his head and did not speak, but the sorrow on his face deepened. Before he could finish speaking, the cry of a night owl came from the sky. Normally, there would be people sweeping and tidying up the observatory, so how could there be a night owl? Everyone was bewildered when they saw a black shadow flash across the sky. That shadow was extremely fast, and it only skimmed over everyone's heads. There were no archers on the observatory, so they could not shoot that thing down with one shot. Ah! Empress Shu screamed. That black shadow looked like a bird, and it seemed to be holding something in its claws. When it flew to the top of Imperial Consort Chen's head, it loosened its grip, and that thing fell right into Imperial Consort Chen's bosom. This was what Empress Shu was screaming about. The Empress's eyes moved slightly, and she said, "Quickly protect the Imperial Consort." The Imperial Guard hurriedly stepped forward and picked that thing out. Imperial Consort Chen was also startled, but she had always been able to endure it. She only had a slightly panicked expression on her face, but in the end, she still steadied herself and did not do anything that would cause her to lose her composure. When the Imperial Guard who had picked out the thing saw the thing on the sword, he jumped in fright and suddenly froze on the spot, not knowing what to do. When the surrounding people saw this scene, they became curious and craned their necks to see clearly what it was. When Imperial Consort Chen saw the Imperial Guard's expression, her heart sank. When she saw clearly what it was, her vision blurred, and she almost fainted. She saw that the thing on the ground was still bouncing non-stop. It was a slender body covered in scales, and it was clearly a snake. The snake's scales were grayish-yellow, and there seemed to be 4 protrusions under its body, as if it was about to grow legs. "The golden dragon has appeared," someone murmured. Imperial Consort Chen hurriedly looked at the Emperor's expression, only to see that the Emperor's face was ashen as he looked at the snake rolling on the ground, forcefully suppressing his emotions. Hui Ju's voice leisurely sounded from the observatory, "The star of the year swallows the moon, there is a great mourning, the female lead kills the monarch, the position changes." It was like a proverb from the end of the world, and it sounded like a clap of thunder in everyone's ears. Hui Ju put his palms together, as if he was a disciple who was listening to the decree of Buddha. Imperial Consort Chen's body went limp, and she finally could not support herself anymore and fell to the ground. The Emperor and Empress's expressions changed greatly, and Empress Dowager Ida clenched her fists tightly. There was a tense atmosphere in the palace. Only Jiang Ruan's lips curled into an extremely faint smile. The golden dragon had fallen on the body of the Imperial Consort, and the female lead had killed the monarch. If one were to say that there was still a fluke in the beginning, then Hui Ju's words could be said to be a heavy nail in everyone's heart. Xian Li immediately walked out and hurriedly knelt down beside Imperial Consort Chen. He kowtowed heavily to the Emperor a few times, "Imperial Father, how could Imperial Mother be a demonic star? Imperial Father, there must be a mistake somewhere. This son is willing to use his life to guarantee that Imperial Mother is definitely not a demonic star that brings disaster to the country." The Emperor stood up and slowly walked over to Imperial Consort Chen, who had fallen to the ground. Imperial Consort Chen did not beg for mercy, nor did she cry out her grievances. She quietly looked at the Emperor, and a gentle smile appeared on her lips. A trace of surprise flashed in Tian Zhu's eyes. She thought that this Imperial Consort Chen was indeed different from ordinary people. If it had been any other Imperial concubine, they would have already started to make a big fuss. However, she did not point out others like Beauty Wang, nor did she beg for mercy from the emperor. She merely smiled as usual, and it was enough to make the emperor hesitate. Indeed, the emperor looked at the woman in front of him with a somewhat perplexed expression. In the depths of the palace, perhaps only imperial consort Chen could make him feel as if he was walking into the depths of Jiangnan's rivers and lakes. However, it was this woman who was now a demonic star that wanted to shake the foundation of the great Jin dynasty. The great cause of the emperor had never been one to be soft-hearted. With just a moment of hesitation, the emperor's face had already completely dispelled his previous hesitation. He lightly said, "Come, send imperial consort Chen into the cold palace." Imperial father, Xianli was greatly alarmed. He wanted to say more, but imperial consort Chen shook her head and said, "Imperial son, listen to your imperial father." The emperor's eyes flashed with a trace of reluctance, and he couldn't help but call out imperial consort Chen's maiden name, Lian. Imperial consort Chen quietly prostrated herself, and her voice was as gentle and pleasant as before. "If I can do something for the great Jin dynasty's rivers and mountains, this concubine's death will not be regretted. I only wish for the people of the world to be safe and sound. This concubine will have no complaints." Such moving words, such awe-inspiring righteousness. All the palace attendants present were somewhat moved, and even Empress Dowager Ida sighed softly. Jiang Yuan raised her eyebrows. Imperial consort Chen really knew how to put on an act. Even now, there was not a trace of panic on her face. Was she certain that Xianli would save her in the end? As if she felt a gaze fall on her, Jiang Yuan turned her head and met Xiao Xiao's deeply concerned gaze. Seeing her look over, Xiao Xiao pursed his lips and nodded almost imperceptibly. Jiang Yuan gently nodded. In the end, she had not shown up for today's matter. She had merely given a few words of advice, but Hui Ju had made her have a whole new level of respect for him. If he did not have some ability, he would not have been able to climb to this position. All these years, she had underestimated Hui Ju. The emperor waved his hand in deep sorrow, and a few imperial guards came down to take imperial consort Chen away. She was only banished to the cold palace, but imperial consort Chen's life was not taken. After all, the emperor still cared about old sentiments. However, the cold palace had always been inextricably linked to the words piles of bones. If he wanted to secretly dispose of it, it would be a very simple matter. What exactly did the emperor mean by this move, and what would happen in the future, was still unknown. When imperial consort Chen passed by Jiang Yuan, she paused and smiled. "Juanju's attire today is really beautiful. Your ladyship flatters me." Jiang Yuan smiled lightly. The ridicule in her gaze made the originally calm imperial consort Chen go crazy for a moment, and she almost couldn't control the smile on her face. How could she not smile beautifully as she watched the person who thought herself clever fall into the trap? "I hope that Junju can continue to be this beautiful." Imperial consort Chen clenched her teeth. "I hope that your ladyship can see that day." Jiang Yuan did not back down. Imperial consort Chen's actions fell into Xian Li's eyes, and he was startled. He narrowed his eyes to size up Jiang Yuan, and slowly clenched his fists. At the end of the proper religious ceremony, the unforeseen event in the middle was something that no one had expected. Beauty Wang died an unnatural death, and imperial consort Chen suddenly became a demonic star, and was banished to the cold palace. Minister Chen and his family knelt outside Jingyang Palace for an entire night. Minister Chen fainted from exhaustion, but Xianli continued. However, the emperor seemed to have steeled his heart. Accompanied by the empress, he did not care about what was happening outside. Concubine De and Xianhua, on the other hand, were overjoyed. Originally, there was nothing to fear about the empress, and concubine Shu only had a daughter. Xianli lost imperial consort Chen as a backer, and his power was almost reduced by half. If the son of a demonic star wanted to fight for the throne, it was wishful thinking. If one day, a crown prince was appointed, the position of heir apparent would naturally be in the fifth prince's pocket. Not only did Xianhua think this way, but many people in the court who were hesitant, after this incident, expressed their attitudes and stood on the fifth prince's side. Even some people who were originally on Xian Li's side also sided with Xianhua after this incident. The fight for the throne was changing rapidly, and the fall of the most favored imperial consort Chen also gave the harem concubines many opportunities. Coupled with the fact that the palace was about to select new beauties, the court officials began to size up their daughters. The supervisors on the observatory, including Ling Tai Lang, were all removed from their positions due to dereliction of duty and were fined a large sum of money. This was because, as the people of the imperial astronomer, they had failed to supervise properly. On that day, if the state preceptor, Hui Ju, had not been present, there would have been chaos. After this incident, Hui Ju said that he had revealed too much of the secrets of heaven and went into seclusion in the temple. The emperor became increasingly respectful towards him, and his position unconsciously became more stable. When Lu Zhu told Jiang Ruan about these matters, she said, "In short, the people of the imperial astronomer now have only themselves to blame. This is really delightful." The people of the imperial astronomer had colluded with imperial consort Chen, and on that day, they had only wanted to throw dirty water on her. Unexpectedly, Hui Ju had appeared midway. The Bai Luo fragrance on her clothes had long been washed away by Tianzhu. As for the perfume on Beauty Wang's body, it was given to Jean Eyre and Jean San to send as a gift. Jean Eyre and Jean San were much more capable than the imperial guards in the residence of the imperial concubines. For example, they were even more adept at this kind of private matter. Minister Chen had knelt in Jingyang Palace for an entire night. On the surface, he appeared to be respectful and pleading for mercy on behalf of imperial consort Chen, but in reality, in the eyes of the emperor, it was a blatant provocation. The Chen family had already angered the emperor. Perhaps Minister Chen had not realized it yet, but there would come a day when he would regret what he had done today. Imperial consort Chen wanted her life, but she did not want imperial consort Chen to die so early. Just like Xia Yan, as long as imperial consort Chen was alive, she would forever create a stain on Xian Li's life. Xian Li was a filial son, but she did not know whether he would be like the two Jiang siblings and kill his own mother. It was just that in the previous life, Xian Li's actions had revealed his attachment to imperial consort Chen. In this life, if he was still a filial son, he would certainly not kill his own mother. Thus, the only thing Xian Li could do was to advance his grand plan of seizing the throne. Without imperial consort Chen behind him, it was not clear whether he could act as appropriately as before. However, the current situation had suddenly changed, and Xian Li would easily make mistakes. Chapter 128. The stars in the night sky seemed to be the same as before, but the situation outside had undergone earth-shaking changes. On the surface, there seemed to be nothing going on in the palace, but in the dark, it had already turned the world upside down. Zhuang's reputation was now ruined, and his backer, imperial consort Chen, had already fallen from power. For the sake of his own reputation, Xian Li absolutely did not dare to use him again. His entire official career had been ruined by Jiang Li. When he saw the people of the Jiang Fu who had come to offer their condolences, it was difficult to conceal the anger in his eyes. Fearing that second Yinyang would do something out of line again, Jiang Quan did not bring her along. Jiang Ruan followed behind Jiang Quan and offered incense to Jiang Li's memorial tablet in the morning hall. Zhuang, dressed in mourning clothes, looked coldly at Jiang Ruan. In Zhuang's view, Jiang Ruan must have played a part in the incident at the Langzhong Fu. If Jiang Li had humiliated him, then Jiang Ruan was the main culprit. Jiang Dan's voice was cold, and second Yinyang seemed to come back to her senses. Jiang Dan continued, "If second Yinyang still wants to avenge third Jijia, then you'd better listen to me obediently." Because of Xia Yan's matter, Jiang Su harbored some anger towards Jiang Quan and was no longer as respectful as before. At this moment, Jiang Quan was on the other side and did not hear Jiang Su Su's words. Jiang Su Su's words were so unrestrained, but Jiang Dan timidly smiled and said, "Second Jijia, don't tease Dan Nyang. What nonsense are you saying?" Second Nyang slapped the maidservant's face. "If I hear you say such treasonous words again, see if I don't tear off your mouth while you're still alive and sell you to the most despicable brothel." Yang Lu glanced worriedly at Second Nyang. When she met Jiang Dan's eyes, she was shocked. The previously weak and incompetent fourth young mistress now had a pair of eyes that seemed to have knives in them. It made people feel cold just by looking at them, as if they were a snake waiting for its prey. Yang Lu gritted her teeth and braced herself to say, "Then I'll have to trouble Fourth Mississippi." She lowered her head and ran out. The ground was covered with dust and cobwebs, and there was a smell of decay in the air. The windows of the house were not open, as if the people inside were extremely afraid of sunlight. The curtains were drawn tightly, emitting a damp stench in the summer. Now, the Jiang family only had 3 daughters left. Jiang Wan was charming, Jiang Su Su was elegant and pretty, and the only remaining daughter, Jiang Dan, seemed to have suddenly shed off her lowly outer shell and was reborn. Although her appearance was not as beautiful as the 2D daughters, she had a delicate and pitiful temperament. This kind of temperament could arouse a man's desire to protect her. Zhuo Jiang was startled at first when he heard that voice. His gaze fell on Jiang Dan, who was dressed in white silk mourning clothes. Jiang Su Su was used to wearing white clothes, so she had a kind of immortal aura. Jiang Dan, on the other hand, was much more popular. She was like the beautiful girl next door, pure and lovely, delicate and moving. Agitated by the scorn in Jiang Ruan's gaze, Zhuo Jiang's gaze became somewhat crazed. He only felt that those unpleasant memories, the humiliation of being ridiculed in the past few days, had all welled up in his heart, and he was almost unable to control himself from rushing forward. At this moment, he heard a gentle voice say, "Brother-in-law, restrain your grief and accept the vicissitudes of life." However, no matter what the outside world said, Jiang Li was after all a daughter of the Jiang family. As the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu, there was absolutely no reason for her to stay in the palace and refuse to return to attend the funeral. The Jiang family did not say anything, but it seemed that Second Nyang had lost her mind and brought people from her paternal family to fight. As a result, the people of the Dr. Fu responded with cold faces, saying that a married daughter was like spilled water. Jiang Li had lost her chastity first, so no matter what, it was not Second Nyang's place to demand an explanation. When Jiang Quan learned of this matter, he hurriedly went to take Second Nyang away, and Second Nyang's status in the Fu plummeted. With such a sudden change in the palace, Jiang Wan calmly prepared to return to the Jiang Fu. Because, Jiang Li was dead. Jiang Su Su's expression was somewhat complicated. On one hand, she naturally rejoiced in Jiang Li's misfortune, but Jiang Li's mishap had also implicated the reputation of the other daughters of the Jiang family. In the future, it would also have a certain impact on her marriage. Thinking that Xia Yan was still imprisoned in the little Buddha hall, and that Jiang Quan had no intention of letting her out, she could not help but feel a trace of irritation in her heart. Yes, Jiang Dan's tranquil smile instantly became somewhat strange. She softly said, "Doesn't Nyang feel that Third Jiejia's death is too strange? Admittedly, Third Jiejia's marriage should have been undertaken by me. Therefore, regarding this matter, I specially inquired about it. Who knew that it would have been fine if I had not inquired about it, but after doing so, I found out about a wonderful matter." The courtyard where Second Nyang resided in the Jiang Fu was now desolate. The flowers in front of the window had not been watered for a long time, and in one night, it was as if they had all died. Weeds grew everywhere. Second Nyang had always been the most particular about such things, and she also loved to decorate things that were grand and majestic. The courtyard had always been filled with jade wares, gold and silver, but now, it was as if it had been robbed, and the shelves were completely empty. Second Yang was acting so crazily that the servant girl was so frightened that she did not care about her pain, and hurriedly said, Yang, your illness is acting up again. Please drink this medicine, you will feel better after drinking it. Such a lukewarm attitude, and no anger, caused Jiang Su's eyes to flash, and she could not help but feel a sense of melancholy. Jiang Yuan had always been a scheming person, and she also had the Empress Dowager and the Zhao family to rely on. Now, even Jiang Dan had become so difficult to deal with. The more she felt, the more resentful she felt. Jiang Yuan, she harmed my Li, I want her to be buried with her. Second Yang clenched her fists tightly, and her eyes were practically spitting fire. Originally, she had thought that with Jiang Li married to Lang Zhong's wife, and Xia Yan banished to the little Buddha Hall, the Jiang Fu would now be under the sole control of Second Yang. Who knew that on the day of the wedding, such a scandal would occur? Now that Jiang Li was dead, it could be said that she had completely shed all pretense of cordiality with Lang Zhong's Fu. Jiang Quan was already angry at Jiang Li's actions, and when he saw Second Yang shamelessly demanding an explanation from Lang Zhong's Fu, he was also filled with resentment. Thus, he simply put Second Yang under house arrest. The person who had come was dressed in a light yellow skirt, and her smile was quiet and shy. She said softly, I have come to console Second Yang. Jiang Yuan calmly looked him in the eye. Her skills were inferior, and she was willing to admit defeat. Zhujiang had thought that he could climb the road to meteoric success, but who knew that it was merely a shortcut to hell? Second Yang finally raised her head, and fiercely glared at Jiang Dan, that should have been your end. Li died in your place. You jinx, it was you who caused Li Er's death. Return my Li Er. As she finished speaking, she was about to pounce on Jiang Dan with bared fangs and brandished claws. However, she had been locked up in the room for a long time, and these few days, she had become so haggard that she had lost her human form. Jiang Dan only needed to twist her body slightly to avoid her. But today, seeing Jiang Dan, his eyes could not help but brighten. He thought to himself that this was what should have been his wife. His wife should have been such a gentle and virtuous lady. The more he thought about it, the more he recalled Jiang Li's shamelessness, and the more unwilling he felt. Now, father is very angry with Second Yang. If Second Yang wants to avenge Third Jijia, you cannot act rashly. Otherwise, not only will you not be able to redress Third Jijia's grievances, but you will also lose your own life. Second Yang's words are very strange. Jiang Dan smiled. At that time, was it me who wanted to throw the marriage to Second Yang? No, it was father and Second Yang who thought of a way to snatch the marriage away from Dan Yang's hands. Third Jijia was happy for a long time, but she did not know that the marriage that Second Yang had chosen for her would ultimately send her to the Yellow Springs. Jiang Dan sighed softly, what an injustice. When Jiang Li died, the Lang Zhong Fu did not immediately notify the Jiang Fu. Therefore, only one day after Jiang Yuan returned to the Fu, it was the day of Jiang Li's funeral. As the Lang Zhong Fu, Jiang Li's funeral was also handled by the Lang Zhong Fu. It was inevitable that some people would talk about Jiang Li's death. A wife who had lost her chastity died a few days after marrying into the family. If one were to say that Zhujiang did not play a part in this, no one would believe it. The Zhou family seemed to have considered this point, and Jiang Li's funeral was not the least bit sloppy. However, the people who came to mourn could see the displeasure on Zhujiang's face. What is it? Second Yang grabbed Jiang Dan's hand, a trace of anxiety flashing in her eyes. Jiang Dan smiled and patted her hand, speaking of which, I also did not dare to believe this matter, because, in the end, this matter is related to the Jijia. Every word of her words poked into Second Yang's heart. In fact, after Jiang Dan finished speaking, Second Yang believed her. It was a lie, and this lie was too flawless. More importantly, the pain of losing her daughter was something that Second Yang could not bear. Jiang Li's death had been caused by her. Whenever she thought of this matter, Second Yin Yang wished that she could dig out her heart. But now, Jiang Dan's words gave Second Yin Yang an outlet to vent. To be able to vent all her hatred on Jiang Ruan, how could she not be happy? Tian Zhu noticed Jiang Ruan's small movement, and the expression in her eyes changed. She looked thoughtfully at Jiang Dan and Zhujiang, and her gaze returned to confusion. However, Jiang Dan seemed to be a little afraid of Zhujiang's fixed gaze. She took 2 steps back and said, "Brother-in-law." That voice did not come from the thoughtful Jiang Su, but from the delicate and timid Jiang Dan. The real murderer? Second Yin Yang suddenly raised her head. Second Yin Yang looked at Jiang Dan's peaceful smile and could not help but shiver. For the first time, she felt that this weak and incompetent orphan girl was so terrifying. With this kind of scheming, if she had really fought against Jiang Li would not have been her opponent. She murmured, "Why did you do this?" The servant girl lifted the bowl of medicine in her hands and said softly, "Yin Yang, it's time to take your medicine." Jiang Dan smiled lightly. "Yin Yang still doesn't believe Dan Yang's words at this time, don't you think it's strange?" On the day of third Jiejia's wedding, eldest Jiejia entered the palace. If not for the protection of someone in the palace, how could eldest Jiejia be so unscrupulous? "If Yin Yang doesn't believe me, you can go and ask around yourself. However, it's difficult for Yin Yang to leave now, and the only person you can trust is me." However, ever since Second Yin Yang's accident, Jiang Quan had placed her under house arrest, and only Yang Lu was left to serve her. When Second Yin Yang went crazy, how could Yang Lu hold her back alone? Jiang Li's death had a huge impact on Second Yin Yang. These few days, she often acted as if she had lost her mind, and the physician only prescribed some calming prescriptions. It turned out that such a reckless and arrogant person had unexpectedly fallen to such a miserable end, which made one unable to help but sigh. Jiang Ruan did not seem to hear the conversation between the two, and her aloof attitude caused Jiang Dan to look at her a few more times. Second Yin Yang's body trembled, and she howled even more painfully. However, Jiang Dan slowly said, "Yin Yang is originally an intelligent person, and has always been ruthless. That's why you acted so swiftly and decisively to snatch Dan Yang's marriage fate. What, now you actually want to play the fool to escape the pain?" The 2 words "fourth sister" were enunciated with great emphasis, as if it contained some indescribable emotion. Jiang Ruan lowered her eyes, and her long eyelashes drew a demonic arc. The corners of her lips slightly curled up, and she actually smiled. Second Yin Yang was still holding her head and rolling on the bed in pain. Jiang Dan quietly walked in front of her, and lowered her head to admire her for a while before she opened her mouth to speak. "Yin Yang, what is the consequence of snatching another person's marriage fate?" Jiang Li looked at Second Yin Yang's sorrowful expression with satisfaction for a while before saying faintly, "I can also feel Second Yin Yang's sorrow. Today, I am here to remind Second Yin Yang not to blame the wrong person and let the real murderer live freely." The servant girl's arm was in pain from Second Yin Yang's grasp, but she did not dare to struggle free. Her eyes were red as she cautiously said, "Yin Yang, Second Miss is already dead." After many twists and turns, apart from First Yin Yang, who had never been involved in the affairs of the Fu, the power to take care of matters in the Fu ultimately fell into the hands of Fifth Yin Yang, Hong Ying. The person on the bed was tightly curled up into a ball, and her hands were hugging her shoulders. Her almond-shaped eyes, which had always been somewhat arrogant, were now bloodshot, and her gaze was protruding with a kind of frenzy. Second Yin Yang's expression fluctuated unpredictably, as if she wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. After a long time, she squeezed out a sentence with difficulty from the gaps of her teeth. "Do you have any evidence for what you say?" If Imperial Consort Chen had not lost her power, Jiang Li's death was bound to set off even more waves. However, Imperial Consort Chen had been banished into the cold palace, and Jiang Li's death was like a small stone thrown into the vast bottom of a lake. It did not cause any waves, and just quietly sank like that. And because of Jiang Li's death, the rumors aroused among the common people were also suppressed by the rumor that Imperial Consort Chen had become a demon that would bring calamity to the country. As if she had completely awakened from her delusions, Second Yin suddenly jumped up, grabbed the servant girl, and anxiously said, "Why are you still taking medicine? Li is still being bullied in the Lang Zhongfu. That wretched Zhou family actually dared to treat Li like this. I must definitely demand an explanation for Li Zhou Jiang then remembered that this slender and elegant young girl in front of him should have been the girl who had been engaged to him 3 years ago. At that time, he had saved a life and left a marriage predestined by fate. However, that marriage predestined by fate had led to the wrong person. At that time, both the Lang Zhongfu and the Jiang Fu had agreed that it was Jiang Li, so he could only acquiesce. He had already inquired about Jiang Li's temperament and knew that Jiang Li's temper was much worse than Jiang Dan's. Originally, he had some dislike towards Jiang Li, and later on, there was a scandal. Even before Jiang Li died, she still wanted to drag the Lang Zhongfu down with her. Every time he thought about it, Zhou Jiang would have a stomach full of anger. Eldest sister was born with an outstanding beauty, and all the disciples in the capital admired her endlessly. Even His Royal Highness was no exception. On the day of third sister's and Zhou Langzhong's wedding, His Royal Highness asked Zhou Langzhong for a favor so that he could meet eldest sister. Originally, this was not a big deal. However, eldest sister prided herself on being a virtuous girl, and now that she was related to the imperial family, she naturally could not lose face for the imperial family. Third sister merely wanted to help brother-in-law, but did not expect that eldest sister would take her anger out on her. In a fit of anger, eldest sister caused brother-in-law and third sister to have an affair the next day. Jiang Dan spoke unhurriedly, as if she was narrating a story. When Second Yin heard this, she felt even more aggrieved. And Xianli, who had always won people over with his virtue and talent, really displayed the side of a filial son. After kneeling outside Jingyang Palace for 3 days and 3 nights, he finally fainted from exhaustion. The emperor was furious and sent him back to his fu, ordering him not to enter the palace. Jiang Wan. Second Yinyang's expression changed as she said, "How could it be related to her?" Yang Lu turned around and was startled. She stammered, fourth young Mississippi, perhaps because the atmosphere here was too awkward, everyone's gaze was fixed on them. Jiang Quan hurriedly said a few words and then left. The old Jiang madam seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. One of the Jiang family's daughters had been lost for no reason, and in such a disgraceful manner. The Jiang family's decades of clean and pure image had been completely destroyed in a few short years. The matter of mourning at Langzhong's fu passed just like that. Most likely, it was a daunting experience, but not a mishap. Zhou Jiang came again midway. His expression was extremely respectful, but his gaze was faintly discernible as it drifted towards Jiang Dan. The meaning behind this was unknown. Because of this, the old Jiang madam flew into a rage and rained curses on Jiang Quan. She only said that if Jiang Quan and Second Yinyang had not caused so much trouble, the Jiang family would not have fallen to the point where they were a joke to others. Jiang Quan responded with an ashen face, but his expression was so gloomy that it could drip water. Looking at the little pitiful Jiang Dan, who looked like a blooming chrysanthemum, Jiang Su's tone carried a bit of ridicule. Fourth younger sister, just now, third brother-in-law really cared for you in every possible way. Come to think of it, at that time, this marriage should have been between you and brother-in-law. Who knew that third younger sister would snatch it away first? So, this matter of marriage should not be randomly decided. Fourth younger sister, now that third younger sister has passed away from illness, perhaps it is a hint from God that it is not too late. Why not continue the previous fate with brother-in-law? The servant girl covered her face with tears and did not dare to speak. Second Yinyang suddenly looked at her apologetically. Yang Lu, I did not hit you on purpose. Right now, the only person I can trust is you. She suddenly hugged her head and cried out in pain. My Li is dead, she's dead. She died in Langzhong's Fu. She was killed by the Zhou family. She's dead, my Li De Jijia is living too well. A trace of ruthlessness flashed in Jiang Dan's eyes. She is living so well, but I am struggling in a quagmire. How can I be willing? Why not follow me and sink into oblivion together? Zhuo Jiang abruptly returned to his senses and raised his head to meet Jiang Quan's displeased gaze. Jiang Wan did not look at him, but Jiang Su's expression showed some interest. Hong Ying supported the old Jiang madam. Zhuo Jiang lowered his head and faintly said, "Thank you very much for fourth younger sister's consolation." Great Master Huiju continued to act as his state preceptor as usual. Now that this matter had passed, his position was becoming more and more stable. However, the fifth prince, Xian Hua, and concubine did not show any signs of joy. In fact, they were even more cautious than before. Now that the emperor's mind was deep, no one wanted to take the initiative to provoke bad luck. Second Yinyang's body softened and she collapsed to the ground. You. She could not say a single word, because what Jiang Dan had said was right. It was all because of her. Because she wanted this marriage, she was not reconciled to the fact that Jiang Dan and Jiang Li were both Shu daughters, yet Jiang Dan could marry so well. She had even let her paternal family's father speak up and persuade Jiang Quan to replace the Gung invitation with Jiang Li. How could she have known that her own selfishness would ultimately harm her own daughter? Second Yinyang was filled with regret. Just as Yang Lu was at a loss as to what to do, she heard the room's door creak open. A gentle and clear voice rang out, "You can leave, I'm here." Chapter 129. What's going on? Du Wan, who had been busy inside, also lifted the curtain and walked in. At first glance, she was stunned. Kai Ke, fearing that the world would not be in chaos, shouted, "Eldest miss has killed old madam. Someone come. Save me." The old Jiang madam's body was already very weak, and because of Jiang Li's death, she had fallen seriously ill. The doctor had come to see her and secretly revealed that the old Jiang madam would not live past this year. Her body was already old, and no amount of miraculous pills would be of any help. In some ways, the old Jiang madam was an understanding person. She understood that this huge Jiang Fu would soon embark on the path of decline. The excessive worry in her heart made things worse. She watched as she aged day by day. She was like a completely different person from the astute and dignified old madam that Jiang Wan had seen when she first returned to the Fu. "What nonsense are you talking about? Get out, I don't want to see you. Get out." The old Jiang madam seemed to suddenly become agitated, and she threw the jade pillow away with all her might. The jade pillow smashed to pieces on the ground, and the ground was covered in sparkling powder. Such a straightforward approach shocked the old Jiang madam. She knew that this granddaughter was different. At that time, the people of the Jiang Fu had misjudged her, and she did not expect that she would have such a fortuitous encounter. However, the old Jiang madam herself knew that she had reached the end of her life and did not have much time left. Seeing the Jiang Fu decline day by day, her heart was anxious. Now, all her hopes were placed on Jiang Wan and Jiang Xing, but these two had been neglected by Jiang Quan at that time. It was inevitable that they would have resentment in their hearts. Therefore, she had called Jiang Wan over today to give Jiang Wan a few words of advice, but she had not expected Jiang Wan to have such an attitude. Indeed, she was no longer the mistress of the Jiang Fu who could summon wind and rain. She was merely an old and frail old woman. Jiang Wan had previously met Second Yinyang in the garden. Second Yinyang had appeared very respectful, but her expression was somewhat strange. Returning to Wanju, Lian Qiao said, "Miss, Second Yinyang looks very strange. Her gaze seems to be somewhat annoyed with Mississippi, was it envy? Jiang Wan smiled slightly. Fourth younger sister does not need to be envious. In the future, fourth younger sister will definitely be more valued than me. The old Jiang madam smiled with even greater satisfaction and instructed Kai K, pack some things for one girl and send them over. She turned her head to look at Jiang Wan, her gaze truly resembling that of a doting grandmother looking at her obedient granddaughter. In the blink of an eye, one girl has grown up so much. To think that when you were first born, you were still a tiny little dumpling. Jiang Wan obeyed and walked over to sit in front of the old Jiang madam. Kai K poured a cup of tea for Jiang Wan. The old Jiang madam patted Jiang Ruan's hand and said, "Wan girl, this is the newly delivered 100 fragrant hawthorn tea. The imperial concubines in the palace often drink it. You young ladies like to drink sweet things, please have a taste. Perhaps Zumo also knows, isn't that so?" Jiang Wan said lightly. Jiang Wan nodded. Jiang Dan beamed and said, "Zumo now thinks very highly of Dejijia. Dejijia is really enviable. Forgive Wan Yang for being powerless." Jiang Wan sighed, "I am afraid that I will have to disappoint Zumo." Jiang Wan nodded and took her leave. Jiang Dan stood where she was and looked at Jiang Ruan's back, slowly revealing a trace of a happy smile. Jiang Dan's expression slightly froze and she looked at Jiang Ruan in distress. "Dejijia, why do you want to harm Zumo? Zumo loves you so dearly and even specially invited you to the courtyard today. How can you harm her like this?" She actually wanted to give Jiang Chao some advice. As for Jiang Su Su, she had now reached the age to look at other people. After all, she had grown up in front of her and the old Jiang madam still had some feelings for Jiang Su Su as a granddaughter. It was just that. Jiang Wan smiled faintly. The harem cannot interfere in politics. The Empress Dowager's kindness to Wan Yang is a heavenly grace. How could Wan Yang dare to control her Nyang's thoughts? As for second younger sister grew up in the capital and is more familiar with the circle of noble ladies than Wan Yang. In comparison, second younger sister has seen more of the world than Wan Yang. Perhaps the people of the Jiang family had a kind of innate selfishness and coldness in their bones, innately believing that everyone in the world should be used by them. The old Jiang madam was the same. She smiled faintly and said in a tone that was chilling to the bone, "Perhaps I should ask, if not for the Jiang family, how could my mother have died?" The old Jiang madam was startled and a trace of panic appeared in her eyes. "What did you say?" Kai K looked at Jiang Wan with some uneasiness. Bai Ji and Lian Xiao, on the other hand, looked indignant. Jiang Wan stood up and looked down at the old Jiang madam. This master, who had previously been all-powerful in the Jiang Fu, was now old and frail. Such a twisted expression, coupled with the loose skin on her face, made her look somewhat comical. Jiang Dan stared blankly and her eyes flashed. When she looked at Jiang Wan again, she said meaningfully, "Eldest sister is used to joking. It's getting late, eldest sister should go quickly. If you are late, Zumo will punish Dan Yang again." Seeing Jiang Wan, Jiang Dan stopped and said with a smile, "Eldest sister. One girl is here, come to Zumo's side." The old Jiang madam beckoned to her affectionately. However, Jiang Dan did not show her usual aggrieved expression when she saw the old Jiang madam's cold attitude. Instead, she appeared to be in a good mood and asked, "Is eldest sister going to Zumo's courtyard?" "Heavens," second Yin Yang exclaimed exaggeratedly, "even if you had a dispute with the old madam, you can't just kill the old madam. Such a treasonous thing, heavens." Kai K went to fill the tea leaves for Jiang Wan, leaving only Du Wan standing silently at the side. Bai Ji and Lian Xiao's expressions changed slightly. Only Jiang Wan was unmoved like a mountain, her expression unchanged as she quietly listened to the old Jiang madam's words, which seemed to be filled with remorse. Seeing her like this, the old Jiang madam's expression paused for a moment, but she only pretended not to know. Pulling on her hand, she said, "Fortunately, you two siblings are blessed with good fortune. Ever since you returned to the Fu, your fortunes have been pretty good. Presumably, the ancestors of the Jiang Fu have long ago blessed you too. Jiang Yuan paused in her steps and looked towards the old Jiang madam, who was slowly collapsing. The old Jiang madam's face was a pale, deathly gray, and the corners of her mouth were bruised. The blood that flowed out was clearly black. In a panic, Kai Kei placed her finger under the old Jiang madam's nose. Her face suddenly turned deathly white and she shouted, "Murder, murder." Fourth younger sister, be careful of the words that cause trouble. Jiang Yuan reminded her, this Junju, as a Junju, can't be compared to an inferior servant girl. From beginning to end, it seems that only Kai Kei has claimed that this Junju harmed Zumo. Fourth younger sister, as this Junju's younger concubine sister, does not believe your own elder sister, but instead believe a servant girl. Isn't sisterly affection too cold? Tianzhu was also strange. She was used to killing people, but was not used to the twists and turns of the mansion. However, Lian Qiao and Bai Ji were somewhat suspicious. Lian Qiao said, "Miss, you must be more careful these few days. Second Yin Yang's temperament has always been brash. Now that she has suddenly become so submissive, it is very strange." On this day, Du Wan was ordered by the old Jiang madam to invite Jiang Yuan to Guilan Yuan. These few days, the old Jiang madam always called her granddaughters to the house. Since the old Jiang madam had come to invite them, there was no reason to refuse. Jiang Yuan brought Lian Qiao and Bai Ji over. On the way, she happened to meet Jiang Dan, who was walking back. Jiang Yuan had only stayed in the Jiang Fu for a few days, but this morning, she saw Second Yin Yang for the first time. Jiang Yuan looked down. The gaze that Second Yin Yang looked at her with was not one of annoyance. Jiang Yuan could not be more familiar with that kind of gaze. It was a bone-deep hatred, like a poisonous snake waiting for an opportunity to strike, a sharp arrow hiding in the dark, full of the smell of conspiracy. In Guilan Yuan, Kai Kei and Du Wan stood on either side of the old Jiang madam, gently fanning her. The fanning was just right. A cool breeze blew over, and the old Jiang madam showed a rare expression of comfort. She was too old to use ice to avoid catching a cold. Lu Zhu received the order and left. The old Jiang madam said, "You are all children of the Jiang Fu, so you must support each other. Zumo does not have many days left to live. I hope that you, sister and brother, will love each other. In the past, it was your father who let you down. Now that Zumo has locked up that bad woman, let's not mention the past. If the Jiang family is good, in the future, you will also have to save face, right?" She nagged, "Your eldest brother is an official in the court, and he also needs his brother's help. In the future, when you marry, won't you also need to look after your own Fu's circumstances? Zumo knows that you are a good person, so help them out on a daily basis, so that in the future, you will also be able to look after them." When Jiang Yuan entered, she saw this scene. The old Jiang madam looked tired, her clothes were somewhat wrinkled, and her hair was completely white. Hearing the noise, she opened her eyes slightly, and her gaze was somewhat turbid. Without any reason, the old Jiang madam naturally would not mention these things. Jiang Yuan only smiled and listened. The old madam continued, "Your mother is unlucky, and left you and your sister early on. At that time, Xia Yan, that bad-hearted person, caused you to suffer. These years, your father has also been soft-hearted, causing you to suffer a lot for no reason. Speaking of which, it is the Jiang Fu that let you down." Being stared at by those eyes, Kai Kei could not help but feel a little guilty. However, she quickly replied, "There is only eldest young miss and old madam in the room. Eldest young miss and old madam are very close, and just now, old madam even quarreled with eldest young miss." In both her past and present life, the old Jiang madam had never treated her so amiably and intimately. Although the old Jiang madam had not made things difficult for her in her past life, some of Xia Yan's and Jiang Quan's actions had also been tacitly approved by her. To the old Jiang madam, the Jiang Fu's glory was more important than anything else. As long as the Jiang Fu could prosper day by day, what was the sacrifice of Jiang Wan? Jiang Wan muttered to herself for a moment, then called Lu Zhu over, "Go and find out if Second Yang had seen anyone before her house arrest was lifted, and if there was anything special about her recently." Jiang Wan smiled slightly, picked up the tea on the table, and moistened her mouth, saying, "It's very sweet. They are all your brothers and sisters, yet you are actually not willing to help them." The old Jiang madam was somewhat angry. Melancholy rose in the old Jiang madam's heart, but Jiang Wan was now a Junju that the Empress Dowager had requested, and the General Fu's attitude was also thought-provoking. Looking at Jiang Ruan's indifferent expression, she felt somewhat powerless and angry in her heart. Finally, she smiled and said, "Your second older brother is also doing a good job at the moment. Since you are close to the Empress Dowager, you can mention a word or two on a daily basis. Moreover, Su-er is still your younger sister. When there are gatherings of the young ladies, bring her along and let her see the world." "Zumo, what are you afraid of?" Jiang Wan said, "I will not treat the Jiang family the way the Jiang family treated mother. It would not be so easy. The Jiang family would one day return the pain that had been inflicted on them 1,000 times over." "I understand." Jiang Wan stood up and said, "Since fourth younger sister is so enthusiastic, there is no harm in finding something to do with her." She narrowed her eyes, and her tone abruptly became cold, "Jin Jin San." Jiang Wan narrowed her eyes and smiled coldly. She looked at Kai Ke, who was hugging the old Jiang madam. "Kai Ke, did you really see me kill someone?" The old Jiang madam was at a loss for words. Not to mention Jiang Chao, just Jiang Su alone was enough to give her an endless headache. Ever since the incident with Xia Yan, not only had the people of the capital ridiculed Jiang Quan for being cuckolded by the capital's most talented woman, Jiang Su had also been implicated quite a bit. The young ladies who were usually on good terms with her distanced themselves from her, and it had been a long time since a noble lady had sent an invitation to invite her out. In the future, there would be even less need for her to propose marriage. The old Jiang madam was anxious and had thought of asking Jiang Wan to bring Jiang Su out, but she had not expected to be rejected by Jiang Wan. Jiang Wan smiled indifferently. It was not resentment, but hatred. At present, she did not know whether she should feel that the old Jiang madam was sufficiently naive. In this lifetime, she only wanted to lead the Jiang family to collapse step by step. How could she help Jiang Su and her younger sister? Moreover, she did not need to boost the Jiang family's fortunes. Since Jiang Quan cared so much about this mansion, wouldn't it be better for him to watch the things that he treasured be destroyed bit by bit in front of him? It was actually a group of officers and soldiers. Jiang Wan looked at the leading official with a smile that was not a smile, and said softly, "This Junju never knew that the patrol office would act so quickly." It was as if they had long known that something would happen to Zumo. The sudden appearance of two secret guards in the room gave the servant girls a fright. Jiang Wan knew that ever since Xiao Xiao had sent these two people had been hiding in the shadows to protect her. She said, "Tianzhu is a member of the Fu, and it is not convenient for her to go out. Go to the doctor's Fu, there is a matter that I would like to ask for your help with." She wanted to see what second Yang wanted to do. Does fourth younger sister not understand? Jiang Wan said indifferently, "Zumo has been plotted against. I think that even in death, she will not be able to rest in peace." Jiang Wan hung her head, and after a moment, she raised it up and smiled, "What does Zumo want me to do?" The old Jiang madam fixed her gaze on Jiang Wan and said, "Wan girl, even now, do you still blame the Jiang family?" "Fourth younger sister," Jiang Wan said indifferently. The corners of Jiang Ruan's lips curled up slightly. The meaning behind these words was that the good fortune that they and their sister had now was originally bestowed by the Jiang family. Yin Yang, please conduct yourself with dignity, Lien Xiao said angrily. Do you know what is the crime of slandering the current Junju? Jiang Dan was at a loss for words, and could not find a reply. She only heard a cold male voice cut in, this official is carrying out an errand. Guards, arrest the eldest daughter of the Jiang family who plotted against the Di ancestor. Lu Zhu was now Jiang Ruan's personal servant girl, and the servants in the Fu all knew that Jiang Ruan valued her. Moreover, Jiang Ruan's status was also that of Hong and Junju, so the servants in the Fu treated Lu Zhu much more politely than in the past. Lu Zhu quickly inquired about the news and came back. It turned out that Jiang Dan had met Second Yin Yang once. These past few days, Second Yin Yang had been extremely careful and polite in the Fu. She was even more respectful towards Jiang Quan, and was also generous towards the servants. Although Second Yin Yang's paternal family was wealthy, Second Yin Yang was after all a concubine's daughter. Normally, she was as short-sighted as Jiang Li, and would not bear to reward the servants like this. However, these past few days, she had been generous in her rewards. When Lu Zhu finished speaking, she anxiously asked, Miss, what exactly does Second Yin Yang mean by this? Perhaps she felt that Jiang Ruan's smile was too sarcastic, and in the eyes of the old Jiang madam, it was exceptionally glaring. She suddenly slammed the table, get lost. Kai Kei jumped in fright and hurriedly came over to comfort her, old madam, don't be angry. Take care of yourself. Jiang Ruan laughed softly, and her gaze was somewhat strange, as expected. When the old Jiang madam met her pair of lustrous and smiling eyes, she only felt as if she was in a cold and gloomy cellar, and her whole body could not help but tremble. Bai Ji and Lien Xiao's expressions changed, and they spoke in unison, what nonsense are you talking about? Miss is standing here well, what does it have to do with Miss? Aren't you slandering us? Second Yin Yang paused slightly, and continued to speak in a loud voice, what? Can the current Junju kill people as she pleases? Why don't you kill this concubine as well? Is there still any law in this world? Because of Jiang Li's death, the Jiang Fu was shrouded in a layer of shadow. The formerly bustling and flourishing Lang Zhong Fu was now clearly on the verge of collapse. Jiang Quan's official career had been smooth sailing for the past few years, but now he had become increasingly unlucky, and even his relationship with the Xiahou Fu had become estranged. His children were even more of a headache. The only two outstanding ones were originally the least favored members of the Fu. Ever since Jiang Li's death had caused a ruckus at the Lang Zhong Fu, Second Yin Yang had been confined by Jiang Quan. Now that she had been suddenly released, everyone was somewhat surprised. What was even more surprising was that when Second Yin Yang came out again, it was as if she had changed into a different person. She was submissive and cautious, and there was no trace of her former domineering appearance. It would be more accurate to say that she was the eldest Yin Yang. The servants in the Fu began to discuss that Second Yin Yang must have known that Jiang Li was now dead, and that she could only live cautiously in the Jiang Fu. Today was different from the past. The originally well-known, gentle and virtuous Xia Yan, domineering, beautiful and unkind Second Yin Yang, had all lost their power. At present, the person in charge of the Fu was the fifth Yin Yang, Hong Ying, who had come from a brothel. Now that Hong Ying was pregnant, it was feared that the Jiang Fu was about to undergo a great change. Her voice was extremely loud, and almost all the servants in the Fu were alarmed and rushed over. Jiang Su Su and Jiang Dan hurriedly rushed over, while Hong Ying was a little further away. With a big belly, she was supported by someone. Along the way, a servant girl must have informed Hong Ying of this matter. As soon as she saw Jiang Ruan, she looked at her with a complicated gaze. Old Jiang Madam looked at Jiang Ruan, her eyes wide open. Suddenly, her body stiffened, and a trace of blood slowly flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Kai Kei jumped in fright and hurriedly patted old Jiang Madam lightly. Old Madam, what's wrong? In her previous life, old Jiang Madam had not been able to survive this year's winter. Calculating it, it was probably after she had entered the palace, when autumn had just entered, that she had been bedridden and had become increasingly thin. Around the end of the year, she had flown a crane to the west. Now, only a few months had passed. Oh my God! Eldest young miss, you actually plotted to murder old madam? A familiar voice sounded from the doorway, carrying with it some of its usual sharpness. If one listened carefully, one could even hear some comfort. It was Secondine Young. Jean Eyre and Jean Sand looked at each other and said in unison, "We will listen to young Miss's instructions." Jiang Su somewhat rejoiced in other people's misfortune, but Jiang Dan, on the other hand, flopped and said in alarm, Zumo, what's wrong? Don't forget that you were born from the Jiang family." Perhaps the old Jiang madam was exasperated, but the words that came out of her mouth were also very ear-piercing. "Everything you eat and use belongs to the Jiang family. What right do you have to blame the Jiang family? Your mother died early. If not for the Jiang family, would you still be alive now?" Chapter 130. Less nonsense. The leading official was an unfamiliar face, and when he saw Jiang Yuan, he was very arrogant. With a wave of his hand, two yamen runners stepped forward to detain Jiang Yuan. At this moment, Jiang Quan was not in the Fu, so the only one who could make decisions was Hong Ying. Hong Ying looked at the official awkwardly. "Official, this matter has not been clarified." "Clarified?" The official looked at Hong Ying in a strange manner. "Someone has accused the Jiang family's daughter of framing her biological grandmother. Now that the witness and material evidence are present, if you have anything to say, say it in prison." He looked at Jiang Yuan and smiled. "Miss Jiang, I am sorry. Official is so dedicated, it is really touching." Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, "But where is the official document?" The official seemed to have long known that Jiang Yuan would ask such a question. He smiled proudly and took out the arrest warrant document from his bosom, waving it in front of Jiang Yuan. It was written in black and white with the official seal. "Eldest Jiang Miss, do you see it clearly now?" Jiang Yuan's gaze lightly swept over Secondine Yang and Jiang Dan, and she said indifferently, "I see it clearly." "In that case, please." "Miss." Lian Qiao and Bai Ji hurriedly said. Jiang Yuan said, "You two stay." A pleased look flashed in Secondine Yang's eyes. Jiang Dan seemed to be somewhat absent-minded from the scene in front of her, and only hid behind Secondine Yang, refusing to speak. Jiang Su only pretended to be sad. Kai Ke and Du Wan guarded old Jiang madam's corpse, carefully wiping the bloodstains on old Jiang madam's lips. The calmest person in the room seemed to be Jiang Yuan. She looked at the two officers behind her and indifferently said, "I can walk on my own, no need to be so polite." The matter of Jiang Yuan conspiring to murder old Jiang madam and being arrested by the officials set off a huge wave in the Fu. Yuan Ju, Jean Eyre and Jean Sand looked solemn. Jean Sand said, "I will go with you to the prison to guard Miss Jiang. You go look for master." Jean Eyre nodded and was about to go down when he saw Lu Zhu hurriedly run into the courtyard. She looked around and seemed to be somewhat at a loss. In a small voice, she called out, "Jean Eyre." Jean Eyre's footsteps paused. He flew down from the tree and stopped in front of Dewdrop. "What is it?" At this moment, Lu Zhu did not care about Jean Eyre's mysterious appearance and only took out a letter from her bosom and handed it to Jean Eyre. "Miss instructed me to deliver this letter to His Highness." Jean Eyre put the letter away and nodded, "All right, I understand." Just as he was about to leave, Dewdrop stopped him. "Hey!" Jean Eyre turned around and Lu Zhu looked at him hesitantly. "Everything that happened before was my fault. This time, Miss has been framed. Please protect Miss this time." Jean Eyre was slightly surprised. It was rare for Lu Zhu to beg him in such a subservient manner. Presumably, she was very loyal to Jiang Yuan. As a subordinate, he admired loyal people. Jean Eyre smiled, even if you didn't say it, I would protect Miss Jiang. You have to be careful too. After saying that, he flew away without looking back. Dewdrop turned around and saw Tianzhu walking out of the house. His expression was cold as he said, "Tonight." In the shortest time possible, the news of Jiang Ruan being taken away by an official spread throughout the entire capital. The capital was in an uproar. Originally, Hong and Junzhu had enjoyed limitless praise ever since she returned to the capital. Moreover, because she had an elder brother who was the god of war, the people of the capital were very fond of her. Who knew that this matter would suddenly break out? It really made people sigh. There were also those who hit her when she was down. They had long known that Jiang Ruan was a restless person. That charming appearance, with one look, they could tell that she had a vicious heart. Now that she did not even let her own grandmother off, it was really very malicious. At the center of the discussion, Jiang Ruan was currently quietly leaning against the cold and wet wall of the prison cell. She lowered her eyes and looked at the dirty straw in front of her. In reality, the evidence in Second Yingyang's hands was not enough to convict her. Even with Kai Ke as a witness, it would not be an easy task to bring her down. Jiang Dan was not such a short-sighted person. There must have been other twists and turns. The official leading the troops was called Li Chang. Now that the patrol office had so quickly obtained the official document to arrest Jiang Ruan, it was because they had received instructions from Hu Qianqiu of the imperial censor. And this Hu Qianqiu? A trace of coldness flashed in Jiang Ruan's eyes. Second Yinyang was originally the Shu daughter of the Minister of Appointments. When she was young, she also had a cousin who was her childhood sweetheart. This person was none other than the current imperial censor, Hu Qianqiu, official Hu. However, at that time, Hu Qianqiu's family background was not as good as Second Yinyang's. The Minister of Appointments also wanted to use Second Yinyang to befriend the Jiang Fu, so this marriage was cut off. Li Chang was the eldest nephew of Second Yinyang's paternal family, and Hu Qianqiu was Second Yinyang's old lover. Now that Jiang Ruan was locked up in prison, it was certainly the handiwork of these two people. Hu Qianqiu had been in office for many years, and the position of the imperial censor was stable. In reality, he also had some ability. Who would have thought that he would stand up for Second Yinyang? A few days ago, Second Yinyang had been so generous to the Jiang family's servants. Presumably, she also had the intention of perishing together with her. However, no matter how foolish and infatuated Hu Qianqiu was, he would not go so far as to lose his position for Second Yinyang. Therefore, Second Yinyang's trump card was definitely not the imperial censor, but, the corners of her mouth slightly curled up, Hu Chang. Lu Zhu had inquired clearly. Recently, Second Yinyang seemed to have been selling jewelry and jewelry. Naturally, Hu Qianqiu did not need Second Yinyang's jewelry. However, Second Yinyang's paternal family's nephew, the ignorant and incompetent Li Chang, who relied on his family to buy a small official position, was said to have lost a large sum of money in a gambling den a few days ago. In this world, gambling addicts always had big guts, especially gambling addicts who had lost so much that their eyes were red. Second Yinyang had promised Li Chang a large sum of money. What did she want Li Chang to do? It was already nightfall, and the prison became even more damp and cold. This prison seemed to have been specially arranged. There were no other prisoners around, and it was empty. It seemed that she was the only one in the prison. She did not know where the jailer had gone. Footsteps could be heard from afar, and a group of people walked in. The man in the lead was dressed in coarse hemp clothing. When he saw Jiang Ruan's appearance, he could not help but stare blankly. He then narrowed his eyes and said, "Juanzhu's courage is indeed great. It is admirable." It was Li Chang. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly, "Young Master Li flatters me." In her previous life, what kind of prison had she not seen? At that time, she had even stayed in a place that was colder and gloomier than this, so what was there to be afraid of now? Li Chang's eyes flashed slightly. Junju actually knows of this humble one. This is very surprising. Jiang Ruan's gaze fell on the few people behind Li Chang. They were all strong and rough men. When they looked at her, their gazes were presumptuous and evil. With one look, it was obvious what they were planning. How much did Second Inyang pay? Jiang Ruan suddenly asked. Li Chang did not expect her to suddenly ask such a question. He looked at Jiang Ruan with some vigilance, and suddenly smiled. There is no harm in telling Junju. It is 30,000 taels of silver. Jiang Ruan nodded. 30,000 taels of silver. Even when Jiang Li was married, her entire dowry was only 50,000 taels of silver. Yet, Second Inyang was still able to take out so much money. She must have sold all her assets to gather the money, and used all her assets to buy her life. Second Inyang's thoughts were really too simple. Seeing Jiang Ruan's gaze that seemed to be smiling yet not smiling, Li Chang's expression tightened, and he asked, "Does Junju have something to say? This Junju's life is only worth a mere 10,000 taels of silver." Jiang Ruan said indifferently, "Don't you think it is too much of a pity? What does Junju mean?" Li Chang narrowed his eyes. 100,000 taels, I will buy this business. Jiang Ruan said. Li Chang was shocked, and the few people behind him were also shocked. They thought that the rumors were indeed true. This Jiang Ruan was so generous, she must have obtained many good things from Empress Dowager Ida. It would be a lie to say that he was not tempted. Li Chang had just incurred a huge debt a few days ago, and it was not easy for him to obtain Second Inyang's business. Although he knew that it was dangerous, he also knew that if he could not repay the debt, he would also die. Now that Jiang Ruan had opened her mouth and asked for 100,000 taels, how could Li Chang not have his own thoughts? His expression changed, and he seemed to want to change his words. However, a burly man beside him suddenly coughed softly. This sound abruptly woke Li Chang up. He looked at Jiang Ruan with some anger, and laughed fiercely. Junju is indeed very intelligent, but this humble one is not a greedy person. This humble one really does not dare to do this business with Junju. If he was really an ordinary person, even if he turned his head like this, it would not be a big deal. In any case, Li Chang did not have any feelings for Second Inyang, his youngest aunt. It was just that Jiang Ruan was the Junju of Honghan. If it were not for the fact that he was really short of money this time, he would not dare to act blindly without thinking. What if Jiang Ruan came to settle the score with him after she was safe? The people of the imperial family would certainly not spare him. For this kind of matter, the mouth of a dead person was the safest. Li Chang clapped his hands and slowly walked forward, saying, "Tonight, I am afraid that I will have to offend Junju." He inserted the torch in his hand into the mouth of a stone beast on the wall. Under the light of the fire, Jiang Ruan sat quietly in the prison, her skirt warm like fire, her eyebrows delicate and charming, but there was also a kind of mocking indifference. Li Chang swallowed his saliva. He knew that this Junju was born charming, and now that he saw her up close, it was even more tempting. Jiang Ruan asked indifferently, "Does Master Li intend to silence her? Tomorrow morning, the people of the capital will know the news that Junju committed suicide in prison to escape punishment." Li Chang's smile was somewhat vulgar, however, before that, Junju can still enjoy yourself. Killing her before saying that she had committed suicide. Did Li Chang think that the people of the capital were fools? He originally thought that Second Inyang and Jiang Li were brainless, but he did not expect that this big family was the same. However, he also knew that Second Inyang hated her to the bone, and came up with this kind of method to torture her. Not only could she make her lose her innocence before she died, but she also wanted to ruin her reputation. Li Chang saw that Jiang Ruan's expression did not change, and felt his heart itch even more. With a wave of his hand, the prison door opened, and a few strong men surrounded her. Li Chang smiled, "Hong and Junju, we will all be very comfortable." Jiang Ruan's expression became serious, and before she could press the button on the blood jade bracelet in her hand, a pang sound was heard, and the knife and blood burst out at the same time. In an instant, the few people in front of her all fell down, leaving only Li Chang. The door had already been kicked open, and the light gold qilin on the corner of the black-clothed youth's robe seemed to be whistling out of the brocade clothes. Xiao Xiao walked in and coldly said, "Courting death." When Li Chang saw who it was, his body suddenly trembled, and he immediately felt a burst of despair. Second Yin Yang did not say that Jiang Ruan had any special relationship with the Jin Ing Wang of the Great Jin dynasty. He was extremely frightened, and his lower body became wet, and a foul smell immediately filled the prison cell. Li Chang knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. "Wang Yi is too kind." Before he could finish speaking, he felt a lump in his throat, and blood spurted out as he collapsed. Xiao Xiao expressionlessly put away his dagger and walked forward. Jin San, who had been hiding in the dark, quietly retreated. His master had not waited for her to act, and had already personally come to save him. It would not be convenient for him to stay here any longer. After a brief moment of shock, Jiang Ruan calmed down. She had thought that Xiao Xiao would come over after reading the contents of the letter, but she did not expect him to come so quickly. Without batting an eyelid, she put down her left hand that was covering the blood jade bracelet and said, "Later, I will have to trouble you to clean up this area." Xiao Xiao nodded, opened the prison door, and walked in. Seeing the damp surroundings, he frowned and asked, "Is the contents of the letter true?" "Of course it is true." Jiang Ruan said, "It should not have been used at this time, but, forget it, it's better to resolve it earlier." Originally, the contents of the letter could only be taken out and used in the future. Unexpectedly, Second Yin Yang was so stupid that she was forced to take it out in advance. However, in the end, this would alert the enemy, but in the future, they would just have to wait and see. Xiao Xiao pursed his lips, and a trace of coldness flashed in his eyes. "They want to kill you to silence you." Not only that, but they also wanted to destroy Jiang Ruan's innocence. Although she knew that Jin Er and Jin San were by her side to protect her, when she heard about this matter, she still felt a little worried. Rushing over like this, thinking about the scene just now, a layer of extremely faint hostility rose around her. Jiang Ruan was completely unaware of this, but Xiao Xiao's brocade guards must have already investigated the ins and outs of the matter. She simply and generously said, "Second Yin Yang was provoked by fourth sister, and originally wanted to deal with me in this way. The Minister of Appointments is not to be feared, but the troublesome one is the head of the Imperial Censorate." Hu Qianqiu had been an official in the Imperial Court for many years, and he was very attentive from top to bottom. The Emperor was also very fond of this loyal official. In her previous life, she was clear about matters related to the Jiang family, but this Hu Qianqiu had never come into contact with this. In fact, Hu Qianqiu belonged to the Fifth Prince's faction, and originally had nothing to do with Xian Li. Unexpectedly, he was a sentimental person, and was willing to take such a risk for Second Yin Yang. "Leave this matter to me," Xiao Xiao said. "There is no need to worry." Jiang Ruan was slightly sluggish, and she looked toward Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao was looking at her, and his gaze was filled with undisguised concern. She said, "All right." He could feel that Jiang Ruan's attitude was slowly changing, from the initial estrangement to a gradual trust. Perhaps Jiang Ruan herself had not noticed this detail. Xiao Xiao's mood inexplicably improved a little. He looked around and said, "Tonight, you hold on, tomorrow I will take you out." Jiang Ruan muttered to herself, "You also be careful." A trace of a smile flashed in Xiao Xiao's eyes. He thought for a moment, and then squatted down in front of her. From his bosom, he took out a very small whistle-like object and handed it to Jiang Ruan. "The brocade guards are lying in ambush everywhere. If there is any danger, use this whistle, and the nearby brocade guards will be able to rush over." Presumably, it was his personal keepsake. Before Jiang Ruan could speak, Xiao Xiao had already stood up and ordered the brocade guards to clean up the corpses on the ground. Jiang Yuan put the whistle back into her sleeve, and her eyes darkened as she sank into deep thought. In the general Fu, Zhao Guang had just left court when he found out about this matter, and he almost went straight to the minister's Fu. With great difficulty, he was persuaded by everyone. Madame Li anxiously wiped away her tears. Is fine, why would he be locked up? I don't believe that he conspired to harm the old Jiang madam. He must have been slandered. The men of the Zhao family were all incomparably brave, but the women of the Zhao family were all beautiful and delicate. When Madame Li wiped away her tears, Zhao Guang became anxious. Zhao Yuanping consoled, "Mother, don't be anxious, third younger brother has already gone to the prison to see what exactly happened. Those people of the Jiang family, even if they had to die, they should have brought and Xing back." Madame Li was full of regret, "They are a pack of jackals and wolves. No, how can I be at ease with being raised in that Fu?" Zhao Yulong whispered, "That also depends on whether she is willing to come back." Yulong. Zhao Yuanping gave his son a warning look, and Zhao Yulong kept quiet. Regarding his own cousin, Zhao Yulong only had the impression that she had very weak feelings for the Zhao family. Zhao Yulong pursed his lips. His grandfather and grandmother's families still felt sorry for him. Zhao Feizhou looked at Zhao Yuanping and asked, "Second uncle, when will Sister Wan be released?" Zhao Guang also glared at Zhao Yuanping. Zhao Yuanping said helplessly, "We have to figure out what happened first. With third brother around, he would be able to take care of things in prison. However, it is a little strange that the censorate would send out the official documents so quickly." Rubbing his chin, he said in a low voice, "Father, make a trip to the palace and first look for the emperor. For the time being, the emperor will not touch for the sake of our family. Eldest brother and I will go meet the director of the imperial censorate. Nephew De, transfer a few people from the guards to go to the Jiang Fu's entrance and make some inquiries. Must have offended someone for no reason. Mother and the sisters-in-law will stay in the mansion and wait for news. If there are any problems, we will be able to deal with them." Peace returned to the general's mansion after the arrangements were made. Xiao Xiao walked out of the prison door, leaving behind a few secret guards to deal with the corpses in the prison. Just as he descended the stairs, his footsteps suddenly stopped and his eyes flashed with coldness. The sound of footsteps came from the left. Zhao Yuanfeng looked up and down at Xiao Xiao as he walked. In a mocking tone, he said, "Xiao Wangye's movements are very fast." Xiao Xiao glanced at him and continued to walk forward. Zhao Yuanfeng stretched out his hand to stop him. Although Zhao Yuanfeng was older than Xiao Xiao, in front of this young man who commanded hundreds of thousands of genie guards at such a young age, he still felt some pressure. In his heart, he was unhappy with Xiao Xiao's attitude. Zhao Yuanfeng had always been a lawless person, so he immediately said, "Xiao Wangye is a bit too close to her." Xiao Xiao stopped walking. "What can you do?" Zhao Yuanfeng almost fainted from Xiao Xiao's impolite words. No matter what, he was still the third son of the Zhao family. He was also a dignified young general. But now, Xiao Xiao's words made it seem like he was very incompetent. Xiao Xiao fished out a letter from his bosom and tossed it to him. Zhao Yuanfeng caught it. Ignoring Xiao Xiao's rudeness, he skimmed through the letter 10 lines at a glance. Zhao Yuanfeng's expression changed several times. He asked, "You want to hand it over to the censor?" Xiao Xiao lightly said, "Hu Qianqiu hid it, so he doesn't need to be the censor anymore. Xiao Wangye, the censor will reshuffle." Zhao Yuanfeng tried to probe, "I'm afraid it will not be that easy." "Just in time to clean it," Xiao Xiao said indifferently, but Zhao Yuanfeng felt a chill down his spine. "You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.